Somehow I'm late to my late stream. Oh boy. Oh boy. Alright. YouTube is live. Let me double check. It should be. I'm just gonna trust that it is. Welcome, VOD watchers or live watchers and all. I normally don't title and do, like, you know, videos talking about leaks, but I want to this time because I have more positive opinions of Navia and Chevreuse than I think some other people. Well, actually, I'll just name one other person. The Zajef. Zajef's the only one I really watch, like, to see, like, meaningful, like, his thoughts on, like, lead characters and whatever. But as time has gone on, I've, you know, been able to judge characters for my own much better before release and during. And I have different opinions than Zajef, believe it or not. And I quite like both Navia and Chevreuse. I think they're pretty well designed. Even at C0 for both of them, including the 4-star. Now, I don't think Chevreuse is necessarily amazing. I'm not going to try to, like, overstate things in this video. Like, oh my god, Navia is the second coming of Nuvilat, but she's a Geo. Like, no. Like, no. The Geo and Hydra units are different things. Stop comparing Nuvilat and Navia. That's just dumb. But I quite am happy with them, and I want to talk about them because I think people are underestimating some aspects of Navia, and, like, I keep on seeing questions, like, in my Discord being like, what team do I use with Navia? What's her best team? And it's like, she be flexible. That's one of the best things about her. So, like, anyone who wants Navia should be happy because I think they've managed to design Navia in a way where, you know, like, I really like Yai Mika. One of my favorite things about Yai, she's an off-field damage dealer, not an on-field like Navia is. But Yai can be used in many different teams that would care about Electro. And Navia has more potential versatility than someone like Yai, but in a weirder way that's a little bit harder to, like, use, but also at the same time easier in some ways because she's Geo. She doesn't interfere with things. So it's very easy if you ever have a team with, like, 3 core members that are doing something to potentially just slot in Navia in the 4 slot. So if you're someone interested in Navia as a character, I think you should be elated with how Navia's current kit looks because she's going to potentially be able to be slotted into many different teams. How she will perform in different teams and how you will be able to utilize her in different teams will vary a lot. But it is something you can do with her. And that, I think, is cool. So, anyways. I'm gonna go over the characters' kits, Navia, Chevreuse kit in this video. I was considering making this an edited video, but honestly I figured, like, the live stream format was better so I can, like, do a back and forth if anyone has questions about anything. I can try to answer them, or maybe someone will mention something and be like, I didn't think about that, or someone will be able to correct me and say I'm a twat because I don't claim to be perfect. But anyways, by the way, I'm back to already distracted. I'm back to using DPS Kirara for a bit, and I think I might do a follow-up video, particularly because I believe Kirara is on the next banner. I might do a follow-up DPS Kirara video, because honestly, DPS Kirara works noticeably better with Farina, go figure. And that's one of my favorite things about Farina, so it's kind of a... Where did they announce it? Anyway, right there, yeah. So, there's the cat. So anyways, I might make another video on DPS Kiara in a week or two. So, Navia being usable is more than most characters. I used that to W. Exactly. Navia has the best signature weapon. Navia's signature weapon is kind of garbage as far as what it does. It's really bad. It's not that much better for Navia than other options for what Navia wants for stats. And, like, to be clear, it's a similar situation to Freen. It's what they've been doing with most signature weapons recently. But by recently, I mean since, like, 4.0 in particular, where they're making passives that basically may as well say, this works on Farina. Farina gets this much damage bonus and this much HP. Don't you dare consider using it on anyone else. That's what most of the weapons currently are saying. And not that you can't ever use this. Like, I will admit, like, for DPS Kirara, I did a 10 pull on this banner as a YOLO because I realized with Marasose Hunters, a crit damage weapon, that buffs skill damage when I'm playing Kirara, mostly as a skill damage dealer, would be kind of nice. So I wanted Farina's weapon for a Kirara weapon. With Farina on the team, it would work. But that's a bad reason to go for a 5-star weapon. And Navia's weapon, I'm not even going to go into details of it because it's not even worth. It's just pointless. It looks cool. It looks cool, but it's not very good. I do not recommend going for it, but it won't. I mean, okay, if you're getting Navia, it won't be as. The current rumor is that Ayaka and Navia are going to run together, so it'd be Mist Splitter and Navia's weapon, and Mist Splitter is one of the best weapons in the game, and because of Freena's existence, making Marasose Hunters like a relevant artifact set to put on any on-field DPS paired with her, any on-field DPS sword user would probably prefer a crit damage sword over a crit rate sword. So I honestly think like Mist Splitter, now thanks to Freena's existence, has gone up in value. Not like insanely so. It was still really good before, and it's just slightly better now. But something like Jade Cutter, for example, if I'm using Freena on the team, let's say I'm using Freena and I'm putting, you know, Kirara on Marasose Hunters, right? Because it gives a bunch of crit rate. Because I could do that with Freena on the team. Well, then the problem is, you know, I don't want a 44.1 crit rate weapon, even though Jade Cutter is normally really, really good. And that's kind of what that comes down to. So, like, Kirara in that case would absolutely prefer Mist Splitter. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, Farina's gone in 2 days. So, yeah. Okay. But anyways, does Navia actually use the weapon or act with a gun? I mean, she does use the weapon in normal attacks. So anyway, okay, I waited enough for things. We'll go over things. We're gonna go over things like for me personally, and then we're gonna go over things that I just think in general. I'm not sure that I'm gonna go over Navia, by the way, because Chevreuse I like more. Chevreuse is a more interesting character for me. If Chevreuse is on Navia's banner, I will absolutely go for Navia on my main account. But I'm really hoping Chevreuse is on Raiden's banner because that would make more sense, I think, for how Chevreuse works. And also, I really need that on Polearms only. If Chevreuse does not run with Raiden, I'll be very sad. So Dream Come True is Navia and Raiden running together with Chevreuse in the banner. I'm gonna guess it's gonna be Raiden's second half, though. Anyways, let's get into it. So I'm just gonna leave cat sounds in the background while I go over things. And I actually did, you'll see, I did some really impressive artwork because Hoyoverse, in case anyone's not aware, Hoyoverse likes to smite YouTubers. Okay, Navi, or cat, you need to shut up. I'm gonna, how do I shut up the cat? I gotta go like sit somewhere, don't I? Where's a chair? Give me a second. But anyways, you can see my wonderful art. Where's a chair, man? Oh, there's a chair. I found a chair. Okay. Get some Fontaine music in the background. So this is my beautiful artwork that I did, and I know I'm an artiste, and yeah, that's just because Hoyo will smite me if I dare show anything that they haven't announced officially. So that's what I'm avoiding. But anyways, Navia level 90, 12,650 HP. Very high base attack. This is the highest base attack in the game. I believe Xiao is something like 340 whatever, so very slightly higher than Xiao. Base defense is, I believe that's pretty high for base defense, and that's not super relevant. I'm going to actually talk about, like, one thing I think people are underestimating is Navia's defensive utility. So if anyone hasn't heard, she's made to do, like, crystallized things. I'll get into the details of it, and I'll try to show some things in-game. But yeah, the art is coincidentally close to official. I don't know how that happened. I just, like, had an idea in mind, and I went with it. You know, I'm an artiste. Anyways, the gimmick of Navia is that she utilizes crystallized to basically do more damage herself. She's not like Nilou tier and is like modifying the crystallized reaction. She just needs crystallized to be happening and to be picked up to get more damage on her skill. That's literally it. And I honestly think that aspect is kind of boring, but because like fundamentally you could have like had Navia do the same thing without having crystallized as a requirement kind of thing. But it is an interesting gameplay requirement that forces you to think about her interaction with other characters a bit more. And yeah, this is Taylor Swift, exactly. Taylor Swift and Genshin. And that's interesting. But anyways, I'm going to talk about her defensive utility. Because of Crystalliz's defensive utility, Navia's base defense I think is not as relevant. But sometimes base defense I think is more relevant than people might understand. Like someone like Chevreuse, who's my wonderful Chevreuse art. Chevreuse is a 605 base defense, right? And that can make a character notably more squishy when they get hit by like a heavy attack. Like Coppelius in this current Abyss might one-shot or might one or two-shot Chevreuse but will probably not 1 or 2 shot Navia, right? She ascends with crit damage. Its crit ascension is good. Yeah, go figure. So yeah, that's all there is to it. And if you want to farm, I think you can farm for everything now, although I don't even know what this material is right here. So, her kit. Her normal attacks are relevant. I'm going to put them at level 10 because I have a... Oh shoot, where's my document? Okay. Give me a second. I got to open up my Google Docs. But I'm going to put her talent at level 10. Actually, no, I'm just going to go from memory. But basically, let's do passive first because passives are easy. First easy passive is this one right here. So as long as you have a combination of at least two Pyro, Electro, Cryo, Hydra members, she gets 40% attack. If you only have one of those, you get 20% attack. But Navia teams, again, you want to be generating Crystallize. And Navia's main selling point, like over other Geos, is that she has versatility and like reasons to be used, or needs to be used with Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, and just to generate Crystallize. I mean, you can use her without that. Like, you could put her in a mono Geo team, technically. There's something preventing you, but you're just losing damage from her for, like, no benefit. Literally no benefit. There's no benefit to doing just mono Geo things. And, anyways, you should basically always have 40% attack. And, again, she has the second highest base attack in the game. And there's a number of decent options, including... I'm not going to show it because I forgot to like prepare some quality art for it, and I don't want my Hoyo to smite me. But there's a new event. The new event weapon is a Claymore, and it has 565 base attack, if I recall. Actually, let me do whatever. The base attack on the weapon isn't that important. What's more important is it has energy recharge, like 30% energy recharge as a passive. I believe it's 565 base attack, and so the highest base attack 4-star swords can have. So conjunction with high base attack character, 40% attack is a lot of additional attack. And on top of that, it has that Claymore, you have to do like Melocene quests to be able to get its passive fully unlocked, but it has 48% attack in its passive. so that gives Navia a lot of stats for a free accessible weapon. And yeah. And then there's also the likes of like Skyward Pride will be a good option. She is going to have a few energy needs. I'll talk about her energy needs a little bit. But the energy needs is easily something that could change a little bit. Any of the specific numbers, keep in mind, of course, here that like she's in beta. Just last week we saw this multiplier over here get changed in her skill. That could get changed again. I don't foresee part of the reason I'm making this video now is I personally don't foresee any huge changes right now. Can Navia work without beta? Yeah, there is reason to use Navia. This passive requires 2 Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydra members, but there is reason to use a second Geo. The most relevant reason for a second Geo, well, there's 2 reasons. So, again, she synergizes with Crystallize, right? So I'll go back to my game real quick so I can show Dendro Resonance. Can't configure party in my current state. They say Dendro Resonance? Geo Resonance. So Geo Resonance gives you basically increased Geo damage. Doing Rock increases your shield strength. That increases your Crystallized shield strength. And additionally, characters protected by a shield will have the following special characteristics. Damage dealt increased by 15%, and dealing damage to enemies will decrease their Geo resistance by 20% for 15 seconds. Now, you only get that damage upgrade after dealing Geo damage, but Navia's Burst deals a bunch of instances of little Geo damage over time. So this is basically just a permanent damage upgrade for Navia. So there is you do get genuine decent value for Navia's damage out of using a second Geo. The thing to keep in mind is I don't think people should shoehorn themselves into using a second Geo with Navia, because like Albedo, right, in the context of Albedo could be good. You can get more crystallized generation, which might help you get stacks for Navia's skill. I keep on saying Farina for some reason almost, but can be Geo Resonance, right, and that can be a damage upgrade, and Albedo's own personal damage contribution too, right, and that is not irrelevant either. But there might be, depending on what you have in your account, it might be better just to put someone else in. You might want to just, throw, I don't know, what's an off-field character, and I guess I have off-field characters here. Let's say you just want to use Yai and Navia together, right? And just because your personal preference, you want to throw Yai in. Or actually, wait. A better example is, let's say you're doing like Yai, someone else, Navia. Well, if you're doing Yai, there's a good reason to do Dendro with them, right? So let's just say you're doing Farina Yai. Well, actually, no, you do a healer. Let's ignore Farina. Farina's messy. Let's just say you're doing, Yai, a Hydro, like Yelan, right? Yelan will be a good party member for Navia, I assure you. And they're doing Yai, and then there's a good reason potentially to do, a Dendro user with that to get aggravates on Yai. So, yes, the Dendro user doesn't do anything for Navia, but it does do something for your other characters. And the Dendro user might be an increase in your whole team's damage more than having a second Geo would be an increase in your team's damage. It's just you're increasing your Yai damage instead of increasing your Navia damage, right? So I don't think people should shoehorn themselves, and I think a lot of people are. I saw Zajef being like, oh, Navia's best team is gonna be like Bennett, Zhongli. I forgot what the fourth person he put there was. Bennett, Zhongli, Navia, and I'm just like, no, in my opinion, I actually don't think Zhongli is going to be that relevant with her because, Zhongli will be a little bit of a damage increase, but Zhongli contributes no damage himself. Compared to Albedo, I think he's just objectively worse. And I don't think the defensive utility from Zhongli is as relevant for Navia because crystallized generation means you're going to have a lot of shielding anyways from Navia. So I don't think it's as relevant. I could be wrong on that. But anyways, let's sit the cat down and go back. There we go. So anyways, that was a lot of talking about the simplest passive Navia has. Geo is terrible. Yeah, but Geo is terrible because of its lack of interaction. But Navia is a character that... you didn't see that. Whoopsies. Navia is a character that... I swear to God, if Hoyo smites me because I accidentally... Oh, crap, man. I also got these showing now. I gotta zap these again. Navia is a character that... she's made to work with non-Geo characters, but she still works with Geo characters, right? And that means she's more versatile than other Geos, right? When you get Ito, you're kind of shoehorning yourself into doing a mono Geo team. And not that Ito, if there's another Geo healer in the future, Ito Wet Rock teams, just like Noelle Wet Rock exists with Farina, and is very relevant, is better than you might expect. It might end up better than you might expect, but Navia is fundamentally made to work with other characters that aren't Geo, and that makes her more versatile, and I think her playstyle is versatile too. But anyways, let's get into it. Her second passive is, shouldn't spend long on this, basically you get a 4-second Geo infusion to her, so you can do Geo damage with her normal attacks and can't be overridden, typical thing, and you also have 40% increased charge attack, normal attack damage, and plunging damage when during that 4 seconds too. The plunging isn't relevant unless some shenanigans happen in the future, realistically. But Dragon Strike with Claymores is a thing, but let's be real, it's not actually a thing people do. So the scalings wise, as far as the normal attacks go, they're typical normal attacks. This 4-second duration, by the way. So you can use, just to explain real quick, so Navia's skill has two initial uses, right? And you get the infusion after you use her skill. And so per rotation you do 2 skills, which means you get 2 infusions, which means you can have 2 4-second instances of doing normal attacks. And the main reason to do normal attacks, you do get not insignificant damage, like you can see 185%, 171, 69 times 3, and then 264% damage. And you can get, without any speed bonuses from the footage I've seen, you can get 5 hits in. And the total damage contribution from her normal attacks, if you're playing her in a more on-field playstyle, but you won't have to... You have the ability to play Navia in a not very on-field playstyle. But the total damage contribution, if you do use her normal attacks, is something in the neighborhood of 2,000% motion value. Although actually, the last time I did that, I think I forgot to factor in the 40% from this passive. But anyways, without factoring any damage percent bonuses, this contributes probably something like 20%. Actually, I think it's they nerfed her burst recently, so I think it's more like 30% of her damage contribution would be her normal attacks. But you're assuming that you're getting all 5 hits connecting, and Claymore characters have weird problems sometimes with connecting all of their hits, and I don't know if that will remain to be seen or not in game. And on top of that, you tend to dodge, will you have to dodge with the defensive utility Navia? I suspect you'll have to dodge less. But it doesn't mean you'll never have to dodge. You'll never have to be aware of anything else going on. It doesn't mean you're never going to have to, spend some of the 4 seconds running towards an enemy, right? Because if you have to spend a second and a half running towards an enemy after you use Navia's skill to be able to hit them with normal attacks, that means you're going to get less normal attacks in. So basically up to 30% of her damage can be her infusion damage. And that's not irrelevant. But realistically, you're assuming that in ideal situations, like against a boss that's not moving, and doesn't have any mechanics that preventing you from doing meaningful damage to them, like they're invisible or something. Certain bosses right now, right? Navia does have off-field presence, so yeah, that's her normal attacks. Her normal attacks are relevant, but you don't have to use them. And the reason you don't have to use them is because Navia is actually very quick swappy. She does have off-field damage that's in her burst, but I'll get into that in a second. So I'm just going to read verbatim what Navia's skill description is first, and then I'll go through it, explaining it more if it's not obvious. So when a character in the party obtains an elemental shard, notably by the way, that says when a character in the party, that's any character, that's an important aspect, obtains an elemental shard created from the crystallize reaction, Navia will gain 1 crystal shrapnel charge. Navi can hold it to 6 charges. Each time a gain is triggered, the duration of the shards you have will be reset. And so she can hold these charges for 300 seconds, basically a long time, 5 minutes. The notable thing, right, is when you pick up crystallizes, you get stacks for Navia. And when she fires these, based on how much stacks she has, she will do more damage. And this whole wall of text here, when she fires, she consumes all charges, blah, 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 blah. They can do, when all 11 Rosula shard shot strikes, so that's when you have the full 6 stacks, they deal 200% of the original amount. So 200% of the original amount is 2 times this 700% multiplier at level 10. So 2 times is 1400% about, right? Now that's against a single target. Homcats, if you don't know Homcat, they're like a data miner. They give us usually reliable, good info on like the technical info for how characters work. That's very important info, understanding how a character actually functions. This does not scale in AoE. So this additional 200%, the 200% of the original damage, is based on projectiles that hit the enemy. And I don't know how in AoE, how those are going to split out, if it's only going to hit, if you're hitting 5 hilly trails that are in a line. I should probably describe. I don't think it describes it here. She shoots like a gun, and it's like a line. It has a little bit of AoE, like kind of like Nubila's charge attack in a line. Has decent range, and she also has a little bit of increased interruption resistance when you're doing her aim mode. And when you do her aim mode, she can suck in any crystallizes around you in a fairly large AoE. But notably, her this hold mode, when she's sucking in crystallizes, only sucks in 3 crystallizes. Which is a good thing, actually, in my opinion. You might say that's a bad thing, because, she can get 6 stacks. If you have 6 crystallized shards on the field, wouldn't you want to absorb 6? No, because of her burst and because of you don't want to suck in every crystallizer around you, because she has 2 skill uses, right? So, and she uses all of her stacks. She only gets up to 6 stacks, and she uses them all. So if you get 6 stacks on her crystal on her skill, and then you pick up more crystallizes after you already have 6 stacks, you're not getting additional stacks, right? But you're using up crystallizes that could have been used for the second skill use. So you want to not absorb all crystallizes on the field right away. You want to leave some for your next skill use, kind of, right? So I think 3 is actually the right amount for her to absorb in conjunction with her burst. So yeah, 2 initial uses of her skill. And this does the majority of her damage. If you are, assuming you are getting like her full normal attack sequence out, her skill damage is like 40 to 45% of her damage contribution. That will vary a little bit depending on what artifacts you have, but 40 to 45%. If you are not playing her with her normal attacks, and if you get fewer normal attacks out, that might go up to actually like 50% with her on-field normal attack playstyle. With her more quick swap playstyle, where you don't care about her normal attacks at all, which I'll talk about her quick swap playstyle potentially making her slightly harder to use in some ways. And like her quick swap playstyle will be more inclined towards double geo, by the way, because her quick swap playstyle may need another geo unit to get some extra crystallizes. But anyways, the point is she can be played quick swap. You don't have to use the normal attacks, and if you do, the damage contribution from her skill is more towards, I think, if I recall, my math was like 67% 67% of her damage is from her skill. And it's in this big hit, right? Now, the notable thing with the scaling of this in AoE that I want to talk about first, because like people are like complaining online about her AoE. I think that's a little weird, particularly in the context of Nuvia. Like, yeah, Nuvia does consistent AoE damage like over time, but Navia does one big instance of AoE damage in a similar like line-based AoE, and I think people are complaining about the fact that, you know, this damage percent bonus, the 200% original damage, isn't really that relevant in AoE, and that's fair. But honestly, the scaling on this would be utterly stupid if, like, the functional motion value you get on from this would be really dumb if it worked in AoE, in my opinion. So it makes sense. But basically, in AoE, the notable thing is that Navia gets less value out of building stacks, but that means she might be easier to play, right? Because that means in AoE situations, because of the fact that you get less value, and I can go over like the math. I can go over like open a Google Sheets or something. Sheets. Oh crap! It just showed freaking Chevreuse right there, man. Oh, you just saw also invoices. That's great. I'm just showing all the information I shouldn't be showing. Whatever. So Navia. Let's. Can I make this bigger? I need to make this bigger. Do. All right. That's probably too big. There we go. So Navia AoE scaling. Oh my god, I can type. So Navia's AoE scaling. Basically, the way it's going to work, right? Where's her talents? Is Oh, it was the wrong page. So 710%, right? And then this 200%. So in single target, it's pretty simple. So you can do if you get max stacks, which I'll talk about like how likely it might be you getting max stacks. I think in practice it might be slightly annoying to have her at max stacks with her skill, the max 6 stacks, but I'll talk about that. We're just going to assume max stacks for simplicity right now. Is 200% of the original damage, and it's slightly less than 200%. I think it's 166% if you don't get max stacks, if I recall. But basically, all right, 710% is her scaling, and then you have 2 times with 6 stacks, and then you have 2 skill uses, right? So scaling with 6 stacks, and then you have skill uses. So her functional value then is this times this, right? Which is, it says 14.2. I don't know how to make it say percentage. It's 1,400. I'm just gonna delete it. It's 1,400%. Right? It's 700. Right? 2,800%. Also, actually, you know, we're just gonna delete this one. We're just gonna say 1,400%. Keep things simple. We're gonna do 1 skill use, right? 1,400%. In single target. Assuming 1 target. Now, the way that AoE is going to work is it's going to be, let's assume you hit 4 enemies, right? Because it hits in a line in a decent AoE, like you're going to have to like think about it in the same way you think about how Nuvia hits, but yeah, if you F up, it's going to be more punishing on Navia versus Nuvia, because Nuvia can move while you're firing, right? Like, I don't want to say that Navia has better AoE than Nuvia, to be clear. I'm just saying, as far as the comparison is not trying to compare the 2 characters' utility, but to compare I'm using them to compare their AoE size, because the way they deal damage is not line-based damage, right? This is not like in-depth calculation. This is not me trying to simulate the damage she will always deal. I'm just trying to help you understand how her AoE damage is still potentially relevant, but means you don't have to worry about her stacks, right? So her stacks, because of the fact that it's based on like those projectiles that hit enemies, regardless of if it all hits one enemy or if it hits only, or if it splits across multiple enemies, Functionally, what her passive her skill does with this 200% damage is it gives you an additional 700%. So in AoE, what you have is the 710% and then number of enemies, right? So let's say you have 4 enemies, and then you have the 710%. So it's going to be 4 enemies times 710%, right? And 4 enemies. And then you have plus the 200% scaling from her, or the 200% of original, which is just 2 times. So plus the additional 700%, right? So it's basically going to be number of enemies times the 710%, right? Equals this. Oh my god. If I can do this right. Equals C5 times A3, right? That's 2,840, right? And then plus 710. So functionally, if you hit with 4 enemies, right, the functional damage value you got was 3,550%, right? Versus 1,400%. And if I change the number of enemies, let's say you somehow hit 10 hilly trails at once, right? You can see it goes up to 7,810. What people are complaining about is the fact that like the formula doesn't look like, you know, this instead. Right. Like that would be absurd, right? And obviously you're not normally going to be hitting 10 enemies at once, right? So if the scaling doubled, if it doubled the doubling, right? Like if you got the double damage on all enemies you hit, her functional motion value in AoE would be really high. But we're talking, right, we're talking against 4 enemies. If it worked in the way that like people seem to want it to work, it'd be 5,680%, but instead it is plus 710. It is 3,550. That's not insignificant, but like her AoE scaling still goes up with number of enemies, right? It still goes up. Like if you hit multiple enemies, you're still getting the 710% value times the additional enemy. And it's like not insignificant when you're talking a big multiplier. And I find it weird that like people are getting really upset over essentially like 1,000, like the fact that she doesn't have a stupid AoE scaling. Instead, she just has normal AoE scaling. The fact that she has any AoE at all should be something that's not insignificant to you. Is kind of my illustration there. So, anyways, this was a long tirade to say that this 200%, the more enemies you're against, the less relevance it has, right? Because it's only in AoE, it's only ever adding that additional 710%, regardless of how many enemies you have, right? So the more enemies you hit with her skill, the less relevant it is to build stacks. And that means the more easy it might be to play her in certain teams where you're just using her quick swap, right? Let's say you're not using her infusion, you're just playing her quick swap, and you are in an AoE situation. If you're going to hit like 4 enemies with her skill anyways, you know, not getting 6 stacks on her skill is not that much of a loss of damage, right? Because it's only that one additional instance of like additional multiplier value. So if it goes down to, you know, 150% instead of the 200%, you know, you're losing only functionally like 200, 300% motion value, right? In AoE, which is not enough to like force yourself to take extra field time or whatever to get max stacks on Navia in an AoE situation, whereas you might want to do that in single target situation, or if you're like playing a more hyper carry Navia team. But I want to emphasize, you don't have to play hyper carry Navia. Like, she works with Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo characters that are like ideally you want them dealing off-field damage. So let's go through the Pyro, Hydro, and Electro characters that I think, and this is why like I think people are underestimating Navia a bit. As far as her utility, is because she can be put into teams with Pyro, Hydro, and Electro off-field characters, or on-field characters, and if you can afford quick swapping her. As far as like on-field characters goes, it depends on like Nuvilet, be like she might work okay as like a quick swap form with Nuvilat, but like it's going to be awkward and trying to, because like Nuvilat wants him as much field time as possible to apply his Hydro, right? And so like I'm not going to recommend Nuvilat and Navia together, but theoretically you could potentially make it work because both of them are a little bit flexible, like Navia more so than Nuvilat, but Nuvilat, you know, you could do a charge attack, swap out, do a quick skill on Navia, and then swap back to Nuvilat, right? So Furina, off-field damage dealer, will work with Navia. Charlotte, yes, but she doesn't really do damage. If you need a healer, she is an option. She can potentially cause more crystallizes or might cause other reactions that are relevant to you. I'm going to talk about her. The one aspect, by the way, with normally Geo characters, people don't think about how they interfere with your other reactions going on. Crystallize, I'll try to show this, but later, Crystallize uses half a unit of an element. So if I have 1 unit of Hydro applied from one of Furina's summons, and then you trigger Crystallize with a Geo character, it will use half of a unit of Hydro to trigger a Hydro Crystallized crystal on the ground, right? But you still have a half Hydro to trigger, you know, a Vaporize with or something, right? So the amount of Geo Navi applies will interfere more than like the likes of Zhongli, because Zhongli's application is nothing. But so I don't know, it's going to be a little bit weird. Like how good particular team combinations are with Navia will depend on how much the balance of like how much application those individual characters have. Like Yai's Electro application in single target is not very high. So in single target situations, Yai without, you know, Yai with a Dendro character, you know, it's probably not going to be a good combination with Navia because Dendro does not do Crystallize, right? So, and like Nahida would apply too much Dendro that like there'd never be Electro on an enemy, which means you're never generating Electro Crystallize. So unless you have another character that's applying a crap ton of another element, Navia would never be generating Crystallize if you pair Yai and Nahida together in that team. But that could mean you just need to swap Nahida to a different Dendro unit potentially that applies less Dendro, and then it would maybe potentially work. But I don't know exactly, right? I'd have to like mess around with it. I don't have the ability to magically predict every situation depending on the enemies you're against, and like you can do the math of like working out how much units each element works, but you're assuming things like, I'm hitting this attack at X time, and then this attack is happening at X time, and in practice, very slight delays in Genshin's gameplay may cause the timings of those to change, which may change the functioning of the team. And you might be able to purposely change your timings to change the functioning. So I don't like doing that. I like practicing things, doing things in practice when it comes to like figuring out how characters' nuance of like the elements interaction going together does. My point is that Navia applies a meaningful amount of Geo, enough that she will interfere with the other reactions, to the point that it might screw with the other reactions you have going on, and you got to be aware of how much, like, what your other characters' pairings are to make sure you have some kind of underlying Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo aura on the enemy to consistently get some crystallizes, assuming you want to get the damage bonus on Navi's skill. Again, if you're in AoE, that won't matter nearly as much. So, anyways, Risley, probably not, but again, if she's quick swap, so theoretically you could probably make it work, but mostly I'm going to talk about off-field. So like on-field units, generally speaking, no, but Navia's quick swap nature means depending on the on-field unit and how flexible said on-field unit, like Linny is relatively flexible to quick swap format teams. You could throw Navia in a Linny team feasibly. I think it'd be fairly feasible. Less feasible for Nuvilat and Risley, because of them wanting to spend more on-field time in like a sustained fashion, in my experience. But Linny, my understanding, is a little bit more quick swap friendly, right? So like Linny could actually work well with Navia in the quick swap fashion, but not with Navia in an on-field fashion, where you're using her infusion. So, but anyways, for the most part, with that disclaimer out of like the on-field units out of the way, I'm just going to talk about the off-field units. So Furina, absolutely yes. Furina's, of course, big little question mark is always going to be, who the F are you going to use as your healer? And Bennett will work well with Navi. She's an attack skill. By the way, I really hate that Navi's attack scaling. I think it's a dick move. But I think they did that just so they said, screw you, you're not supposed to, you don't get to use Husk of Opulent Dreams on Navia. That's my opinion on it. But anyways, Dendro doesn't react with Geo, so there's no inherent synergy to Geo units with Navia, of course. But the relevance for that is still potentially, if if Dendro is relevant to your Yai you put on the team, it might be relevant to do. Say you put Farina on the team. If I'm doing Farina Yai with Navia, it might be relevant to put Baiju for Dendro reaction, right? And then you get some Blooms and Quick Bloom Yai. So it's basically just a Quick Bloom Yai team, but then Navia is like my on-field unit, right? Well, that's a team that feasibly I think could work pretty well. It'll depend on how much like residual Hydro or Electro Aura is on the enemy, but I think there'd be enough to get consistent crystallizes. And that's all there is to that. But anyways, Dia does do off-field pyro, but let's be real, it's not much off-field pyro. I wouldn't say she's the ideal teammate. Dia does have her passive that gives interruption resistance, but Crystallize, oh, you know what, I should show. So Crystallize is scaling for its damage absorption is not insignificant. So at level 90, you can see in this graph here, level 80 or like 80 is like right here. So it's not that much difference from 80 to 90. It does from like 1700 to like almost about 1900 base scaling before any elemental mastery. And this would be based on the character that triggered the crystallize. So if there's residual Hydro Aura on the enemy, Navia is usually going to be the one. Navia would be the one that applies Geo, crystallize the trigger from Navia. Usually this is going to be based on the Geo character's level more often than not, but it's possible you put Geo on an enemy first, and then your Hydro character triggers crystallize, and that's going to be based on your Hydro character's level, right? But either way, and their EM. This is not to say you're going to build EM, but I'll try to illustrate how like Navia you'd expect to probably get at least 2 to 3 crystallized the things per like instance of skill use, right? And the crystallized shields don't stack, but if you get smacked and then you suck up a crystallized shard or pick it up, right? That's another 2,000 damage you can absorb. It's going to make your units more tanky in general with Navia on the team, even if it's not going to prevent all damage. And it is going to provide interruption resistance too. So like the defensive utility, I think, because of Crystallize, like it's not irrelevant. It's quite relevant, right? It's better than Baiju Shield, I'm pretty sure. But anyways. Because of the interruption resistance naturally from Crystallize, I don't think Dia really has any meaningful relevance, but she is technically off-field. Varazon probably not. It's Animo, unless Animo is relevant, but Layla could be relevant, Cryo, but again, Protective Unit, I think having the defensive shield utility is not as relevant when you have so much Crystallize going on. Nahida is just Dendro. Nilu is Nilu, Nilu does Nilu things. If you really want to force her in as a Hydra, you could. I think playing Candace with her would be fun. I think it would be ideal? No, because Candace is never the ideal Hydro, but look, I can 36-star the Abyss with Candace on polearms only. You can probably 36-star the Abyss with Candace and Navia together too, particularly if you have C6 Candace, because you can get, additional Hydro application through her C6, but notably, by the way, Candace's C6 does not work with characters that have their own infusion, because it specifically says when characters affected by her infusion deal elemental damage, then you get this wave of Hydro. So if you're dealing elemental Geo damage with Navia's own infusion, you're not triggering Candace's C6, so like I don't recommend it, but it's a thing you can do. Candace is never the ideal off-field Hydro, but she does do off-field Hydro potentially, and it's not relevant. And she can do one interesting thing though is because her burst, right, you apply Hydro every time you switch, you can very quickly generate a bunch of crystallizes with Candace theoretically. Like instantly get 3 crystallizes as when you use her burst, and then you can get a little bit more with like Hydro infusion, whatever. So I do actually think it would potentially work, but. Anyways, I'm not going to recommend it. I just like Candace. And I am a hardcore believer in people don't actually try to think about how you would have to use her, because she works in a really weird way. Like, you have to think about how you use specifically how she works. But anyways, Tignari himself is made to be quick swap. So, again, like, if you're doing something like Yai with, do an Electro character with Tignari, and you have enough underlying aura to get crystallized going on Navia, you could very feasibly do, Tignari as a quick swap unit and Navia as a quick swap unit. But Off-field units, Yelan would be relevant. Kuki, if you want to do Hyperbloom variations, like you could very easily throw Navia as the 4th slot in a Hyperbloom team. That seems like honestly, it seems like a fun way to play a Hyperbloom team to me. With Navia, Hyperbloom teams are all about the spice of how you vary the playstyle based on the 4th slot, in my opinion. And so I do genuinely think that's relevant. And Kuki's burst would be quite relevant in that team too, because it's kind of like Amber, where you can apply a bunch of instances of Lecture really quickly, which means you can get a bunch of crystallizes really quickly. Which means you could easily like use Kuki's burst and then switch to Navia right away, get a full damage skill going, kind of thing. Yelan, relevant, has off-field Hydro, and triggers by normal attacks will be relevant for either playstyle for Navia, as long as you're doing normal attacks on some character. It doesn't have to be Navia. Yai, I do think will be relevant. Ayato does have off-field relevance. I'm not super familiar with how much field time he wants to spend, so depending on how greedy he is for field time compared to the likes of Nubilet. But at a baseline, because of his off-field Hydro, he should be better than someone like Nubilet with Navia, in my opinion. Shenhe, probably not, unless you're doing some shenanigans, realistically, but she does do off-field Cryo. Kokomi does off-field Hydro, Toma does off-field Pyro. Again, protective, shielding unit isn't potentially as relevant, but maybe you're doing Burgeon shenanigans, I don't know, man. Raiden, again, Hyperbloom, kind of same story there. Raiden doesn't have super heavy field time, so there is potential relevance to having Navia as a quick swap option, but you probably wouldn't be doing Hyper Raiden with Navia, realistically. But it's I want to emphasize, the reason I mention this is because like Navia's ability to not take up much field time, but still like you get to use her, means like you could try. It's much more doable to do something on a baseline of like, my favorite character is Yai and Navia, my favorite character is Raiden and Navia, and getting them to work together on a team is much more doable than it would be otherwise if Navia was just she's female Ito and has to be on field for a long sequence kind of thing, or she's like, or like the worst case scenario would have been if she's like female Sino. So yeah. Anyways, I think I passed over Sino before, by the way. That's fine. Sino is not relevant with Navi, I'll tell you that. Sara, probably not, because Sara is a hypercarry Raiden unit. Yoimiya, probably not. Ayaka also probably not, but Ayaka does have a little bit more freedom to swap to other units, so don't let me stop you again. Kazuha would be relevant only, again, if you're using, I keep on going to Yai, only if you're using other units that you would want to buff. Like, it's not a near 11 option. It may very well be relevant to be able to use Kazuha for grouping, because you can get more AoE damage on Navia, and then also for just buffing your other teammates, right? Because again, if you're doing Yelan and Xingqiu together, you're doing, or let's say Yelan and Farina, I don't know, double Hydro, right? You're doing some wet rock variation, then, well, having a Hydro there might be relevant as the 4th slot just to buff the Hydro damage, right? So it's just not going to buff Navia's damage. So Yanfei, probably not. Tangfei isn't relevant either. Rosaria, yes. Cryo, she buffs crit rate, which is not irrelevant in my opinion. Especially factoring in the fact that a lot of people will not have, what's it called? Her like a crit rate weapon potentially. You might have like Skyward Pride or the Melusine event weapon, so buffing a little bit of crit rate might not be irrelevant. But again, depends on what you want to do on the team, right? Because like Navia is going to be like, okay, what do you want to do other than Navia on the team, in my opinion? It is kind of the question when it comes to Navia's versatility. If your goal is to see the maximum damage for Navia, you're kind of following the basic attack scalar baseline, where like, yeah, if you want a team that sees the biggest number from Navia possible, it's probably going to be, Navia, Bennett, Xiangling. Pyro Resonance would be good for her. And then probably a Geo like Albedo or Zhongli. Like Zhongli would probably be the highest damage you see. Navia, Bennett, Xiangling, Zhongli is probably the highest personal damage you'll see from Navia, while also getting good team damage because Bennett and Xiangling are a combination. But Albedo, I think, might actually work better because, again, the defensive relevance might not be as relevant as like Albedo's own Geo contribution or crystallized contribution potentially. But you get the point. My point is like, you can use Navia with Rosaria, and it's just a matter of like, what do you want the team to do other than Navia's damage? And she has versatility with that. Xiao, no. Unless you're doing VV Xiao. Ganyu has burst support relevance, it's like off-field cryo, and yeah, and so yeah, I think Rosaria is probably a better off-field cryo than Ganyu, but you know, if you have one and not the other built, you know, there you go. Sun Yan, again, defensive unit, probably not, unless, you know, you're just a DPS Sun Yan stan, and then you might be able to do quick swap shenanigans. Tartag, probably no, because it's Tartag. He only works in Child National. Klee, I don't know how quick swap Klee is. I imagine you could probably make it work, though. Venti's an animal unit. Kaching is relatively free to be swapped out fairly often, so I do think Kaching and Navia could be pretty fun. And anyway, I think you get the point. Xiangling, Xingqiu, Kaya off-field, Fischl off-field, right? All those characters very relevant. Beidou does off-field application. Chongyun technically does off-field application as well, but you know, unless you're doing cryo infusion shenanigans, it's probably not worth it. Noelle is where if I get Navia, I'll be trying Noelle in the 4th slot in Wet Rock. So like I do Noelle, Farina, having a stroke. Noelle, Farina, Yelan, and then throwing in Navia in there would be an interesting option because, again, you could like be on field with Navia. Noelle's burst stays active while you're doing Noelle's burst, and then you could swap out to Navia after you get like some crystallizes, use Navia's shot really quickly, and swap back to Noelle, right? I think that would be a fun option. So, yeah, any off-field like unit is potentially relevant. Bennett is good for just buffing Navia's own personal damage, and potentially buffing your other off-field damage dealers too, like Xiangling. So, anyways, I don't know. She has, my point is like she has more team options. Like she's versatile. She has more team options than you do Bennett, Zhongli, Xiangling, Navia together, right? And it's just you gotta ask yourself, what do you want to do other than Navia? If you're hell bent on getting just Navia damage, then yeah, use Bennett whatever combo. But like you don't have to. And also notably, like you get less relative value with Bennett with her than you do with Bennett with a character that has lower attack. Like, because remember, she has the highest base attack in the game, and on top of that, she has a free event claimer, giving her potentially a crap ton of attack for many players. And that means like Navia's relative attack increase from Bennett's buff is going to be something like, you know, a 30% attack increase. Whereas if you use Bennett with Xiangling, Bennett can be like 100% attack increase, right? So like the relative value of Bennett with Xiangling is different from the relative value that Bennett's attack buff gives to Navia. And that makes not having Bennett less bad than it is in other cases. Like Bennett and Xiangling are kind of tied together to most people, right? And Xiangling is relevant without Bennett, but we're not going to get into that. But like losing Bennett on a Xiangling team is much worse than losing Bennett would be for Navia's own damage, right? Like Xiangling's damage goes down more by not having Bennett paired with her than Navia's damage would by not having Bennett with her, right? That's what I'm saying. So, and that means other teams get closer to relevance of potential damage contribution and potentially are better and potentially might have more fun playstyles. So like off-field damage dealers, if they do off-field damage work, and on-field damage dealers can potentially work with Navia too, with a more quick swappy playstyle. But the greater an on-field unit is, the less likely it is you're going to be able to do a quick swap Navia, right? So, anyways, how's the battle axe for Chongyun? Probably pretty not great, but it's a 5-star weapon, so like the stat stick, and it technically has a not useless passive for Chongyun, I think, but you'd have to pick up crystallizes. Like Navia's weapon says you have to pick up crystallizes in the passive, which is awful. So no, don't go for Navia's weapon for Chongyun. Go for Dia's weapon or something if it ever comes back, or just use the Melusine weapon, because that thing's gonna provide a lot of attack stat for basically any attack scaling claimer user. So anyways, that's my spiel on Navia being able to work with like any off-field unit in the game. Potentially any pyro, hydro, electro, cryo off-field unit in the game, without going too much into depth of that. And I that's a big part of it. That's the main reason why it kind of annoys me that, you know, the likes of Zajef are like, I don't think Navia's very good. Like, Navia's best team is going to be Bennett and whatever. Like, I don't think it is necessarily. I disagree with that premise on a baseline. It might be the best way to get the most damage out of Navia personally, but that doesn't mean best team. Like, and I don't know. I don't like that Jeff is making statements like that in his initial impressions of Navia personally. So, anyways, back to the browser. I have no idea how many people are watching this stream, by the way, because my stream dashboard wouldn't load up. So, you know, but anyways, Navia's burst. Let's talk about that real quick, and then we're basically done with Navia. So Navia's burst is pretty simple. So it does a very small scaling here, 135% on activation, and then it does fire support. And basically, she summons some cannons that deal fire that fire around her. It is around the active character, so it deals off-field geo damage, and this 77.7% multiplier is small, but her burst actually hits every 0.75 seconds, and it auto-targets enemies within a radius around the active player. So it will move with the player, so you can run towards enemies to get it to hit them. And it hits a total of, I think from the footage I've seen, it hits 17 times. Although its duration, I don't know, there's some shenanigans with, like, you know, hit lag or maybe going on. I don't know. Normally, like, bursts don't have, whatever. Point is like, I've seen 17 hits, even though, like, it hits every 0.75 seconds. I've seen in footage it hits 17 times, whereas normally you would expect it to hit 16 times. It doesn't really matter that much. It's a tiny little bit of additional damage. 60 energy cost. Oh, and then she generates particles-wise for her skill. She gets 2 skill uses per rotation, so you do, like, 1 burst per rotation, right? And she generates either 3 or 4 geoparticles every rotation, which means I hate RNG particle generation personally. Like, it means, like, you're gonna have to plan around Navia's energy cost, because 25% of the time you're gonna get only 6 particles in a rotation, 25% of the time you're gonna get 8, and then 50% of the time you're gonna get 7 particles per rotation. And that means you have to plan around the worst case. But so functionally she has 6 particles per rotation. I suspect most Navia teams, and it's always going to depend on, like, what your teammates are, right? She's a versatile unit, so, like, depending on how many, you know, if you're using Fischl with her, for example, Fischl generates a whack ton of energy, presuming you're doing something in the team that has reason to use Fischl other than just Fischl there to, like, apply Electro just for Navia, right? But instead Fischl is also synergizing with whatever else you have going on in the team. And you're doing, like, electro resonance, you're going to generate a whack ton of electro particles that, like, Navia's energy generation is going to go down, or energy needs are going to go down. So it's going to vary, but my generic recommendation is probably going to be for a C0 Navia around 30% is my guess, which is a relatively annoying amount in my opinion, but it's going to depend on the team and depend on what your favs, depend on blah 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 blah. It is my guess. Has Mihoyo ever worked an element in any of their games? I mean, I don't think so. They've in Genshin they've changed they kind of did, because, like, they changed how, like, the base scaling of, like, swirl worked and everything, but they never changed, like, core mechanics. They just, like, changed scaling of things, right? So I don't foresee them changing, like, how Crystallize works personally based on their track record, but it's possible. Crystallize could very easily be made more relevant. I'm not happy, by the way, as far as, like, when we heard about Navia being, oh, she uses Crystallize, I would have much rather she did something more creative than gets extra damage from doing Crystallize, but I'm more happy with Navia being made to be a flexible, versatile unit for quick swap, and can be potentially played in different teams than I am with and despite being a geo unit, she has relevant as being a flex unit in different teams, right? Like, that's something I want to emphasize. Is, like, I think I said this earlier. If you have, like, you have a team idea, you got 3 party members, and you're like, what do I want to do for a 4th slot? Navia will oftentimes be able to be that 4th slot. Sometimes not, because she might interfere with what you got going on in the team, but she might be an option that will work, and much better than other units would. She's so much more of a relevant choice as a flex option than any other geo unit is. So that's a big part of the reason why I think she's relevant, but that's not really the crystallize aspect is not really what makes that possible. It's just like crystallize is the gimmick she has going that's required to make her deal more damage in single target in particular, but in AoE it barely even matters as much depending on how many enemies you're against, so blah blah blah. But yeah, Geo not reacting with things is lame, but again, don't underestimate the potential defensive utility of Crystallize, in my opinion. I think people are gonna find that Navia teams end up being fairly comfortable to play because of that. It's my guess. But anyways, finishing with the burst, so plan on like 30 energy recharge if you're going to plan to pull for her is probably the safe bet, I would guess. But it's really going to depend on the team and whatnot. Blah, blah, blah. She shoots cannon fire. It auto-targets enemies. The notable thing in here that I didn't mention, she gains stacks for her skill, right? So normally she can get up to 6 stacks total if you want the max damage on her skill. And she only gets those stacks when any party member picks up crystallizes, and she herself can use her hold skill to suck in 3 crystallizes that are around her. So that'd be 3 of her 6 stacks, right? And then her burst gives 1 stack directly, so it isn't generating crystal. Her burst does generate crystallize by nature of applying geo, but her burst is directly giving stacks to Navia without having crystallize happen to help with Navia's stacks. And so then that effect happens once every 2.4 seconds when it hits an enemy. If you divide that by the 12 seconds, that means throughout the duration of Navia's burst, it will generate 5 stacks towards Navia's skill. So the way it's generally going to work out is like you're probably going to open up with like Navia Q into using your other character abilities, or depending on the duration of your other character abilities that that last longer or shorter. The exact order when you want to activate them will vary, but it'll be something like Navia Q into let's say Elan. You're going to generate some crystallizes, and it's going to generate stacks directly, and then you switch back to Navia after doing other character things, and then do a skill shot, and then you can do some normal attacks with Navia, or you can swap to your other teammates and do some other things depending on what your other teammates are, right? And then you can swap back to Navia again, use another skill after you get more crystallizes generated. So her bursts can apply, the total number of stacks her burst can apply, by the way, with the Geo application. And again, it auto-targets enemies, so in a single target situation, right, we're just going to idealize things and not factor in the fact that you're going to sometimes have to run towards different enemies or whatever, and worry about grouping and positioning, all that, is that it can do up to 5 instances of Geo application, if I recall. Actually, no, I think it can do more, because I think the initial activation applies to you of Geo, so that means it could actually do 2 crystallizes from the first activation, and that actually might make it a little bit annoying as far as like setups if you want to like swirl an element, because the Geo might actually consume the element you put on. So again, like Navia might interfere with what your other team idea is. I'm not saying Navia's going to work perfectly with every freaking team idea you have, but she will work better than Nito will. So if you are interested in Navia as a character, I think you should be happy with her kit being potentially as versatile as it is. So she can generate like 5 or 6 crystallizes throughout its duration from the Geo it applies, and then 5 stacks directly to Navia itself. So that's up to 10 stacks itself, and then you also then have additional Geo application from the Navia's skill, right? And then you also have potential Geo application from Navia's infusion to give you crystallizes. So the point is, like, with the 12-second duration of Navia's burst, in conjunction with the Geo application from her infusion and her skill, you have enough Geo application and direct stack generation to be able to get 6 stacks on Navia, the max damage, every single time, with her as the only Geo unit, right? That's why I was talking about how like it isn't necessary to do a second Geo, but if you want to increase Navia's damage, it will be relevant to have a second Geo, right? And you want a silver to be playable. Sadly, that will probably never happen, I think. So basically, oh yeah, and then this burst, like if you multiply out like all the hits, if every one of them hits, it's something like 20% of her damage contribution. So it's not irrelevant as far as total damage, but you're never going to see a really big number from her burst. And it's not that worthwhile to level up, because you don't gain that much from leveling up. So like I'd probably level up her talent to like 6 maybe. And obviously if you're really dedicated, you can level up any more. But so yeah, she can generate enough stacks for herself as solo Geo. But particularly if she's solo Geo, I suspect you might have issues. So if you look at like the timings of things, right? So this her burst generates a stack directly every 2.4 seconds. So you do something like activate, and it's specifically from the golden salute. So this means her not the initial hit, is my understanding. So you activate Navia's burst, 0.75 seconds. It will fire the initial like shot. which will generate a stack for Navia, and then in another 2.4 seconds, it will generate another stack. So basically, in about 3 seconds after activating Navia's burst, it will generate 2 stacks for Navia directly. Chances are, again, if you do burst into other characters, you're going to have 3 stacks generated by the time you switch back to Navia. And then you hold on Navia's skill to absorb any crystallizes around you, and with the crystallize generated from Navia's burst initial activation, and then whatever you got from after that, you should be able to most of the time get max stacks on the first skill you use. But again, that's 3 of the potential 5 stacks the burst can directly generate. The second skill you use, I suspect what will happen is, right, now you're going to have to wait a potential 4.8 seconds to get 2 stacks. The last 2 stacks from Navia's burst. And then, like, during the right when, like, the burst ends is, like, when you would want to switch back to Navia and then fire another skill. And depending on the exact timing and, like, crystallize lining up, and depending on if you did normal attacks with Navia before, if you're doing that, depending on if you have the other Geo unit, I suspect there's going to be team configurations where the second skill in particular is only going to have 4 or 5 stacks consistently without it being a pain in the butt. Because you're going to have a situation where, like, her burst is going to generate only 2 stacks directly, and then Navia will be able to absorb with her hold 3, or you can manually pick them up, right? 3 crystallized shards, and that's only 5 out of 6, right? So in a single target situation, I suspect she won't necessarily always, depending on the team, get the full 6 stacks. But again, in AoE, getting the full stacks is not that relevant. And we very often have at least, 3 enemies and that you can shoot, like, in a line kind of thing. Not always. We have a current abyss, is like a boss rush abyss, right? And they might do more abysses like that. But more often than not, they're not usually doing entirely single target sided of abysses. And having some amount of AoE damage is relevant, which is good. So anyways, that's Navia. Any questions about her? That's a lot of information. I basically think she's relevant because she's versatile. And she doesn't have, need to do mono geo problem that Ito has. And her total multipliers, by the way, like, is not dissimilar from Ito. I think it's actually slightly higher than Ito's total multipliers, but the way that Ito is built and teams are configured are a bit different, right? Yeah, and that's assuming, like, you're doing normal attacks with Navia too, of course. If you're not doing normal attacks, then her functional multiplier value is, like, less than Ito. So no, I'm going to go over Chevreuse after. Constellations. Navia's C1, it reduces her burst cooldown and gives her energy refunding. This will probably basically make it so you don't need to build or get any energy recharge on Navia. And then it reduces their burst cooldown, which means you basically have 100% uptime on her burst. There might be a factor, by the way, of her burst, like having, it seems like it has some decent knockback, so it might ungroup enemies, which could be not ideal in certain situations. That might be relevant. That could make her a little bit awkward to play in certain team variations. So keep that in mind. But C2 is like your stereotypical damage upgrade C2. It's mostly meant as bait. It basically gives her a bunch of crit. It's not bad as far as damage increase, but I don't know. I don't think Navia's stuff is relevant to go for personally. I'm not going to talk that much about her constellations. And I think everything past C2 you should basically pretend doesn't exist. But yeah, so I don't know. C1, if you, point is, I mentioned C1 at least though, because if you get an accidental C1, it is good. I think C1 is more relevant than C2 for the fact that, like, C1 indirectly gives you more damage by nature of being able to build more damage stats and not have to have as much energy recharge. And I suspect this will basically make it so you don't need any energy recharge in most teams. So, best artifacts. I'm going to show in-game. So I actually did calcs on artifacts, but I don't have them to show you because I didn't do any, like, I didn't, like, save them to a spreadsheet or anything, but I did them in my Discord server. So if you're playing Navia, the notable thing is if you're playing Navia entirely quick swappy, the first thing I want to mention is, well, actually, first I'll mention two-piece combo. So her signature artifacts, I haven't actually redone calcs since they buffed her signature artifacts a little bit. Her signature artifacts, the two-piece gives 18% attack, and then the 4-piece gives up to 50% skill damage bonus, like, after you, but it, like, requires picking up crystallizes and firing a skill. So it's basically, for Navia, this gives 50% skill damage bonus is what the 4-piece says right now, functionally. And that's a lot of geo damage bonus. It's good. Her artifacts are good for her. When I was doing calcs, I was keeping things simple and assuming it just like always gave her that geo damage bonus, and I did it when it was 40% geo damage bonus, not 50. But I was also assuming like it affected all of her burst damage, and the fact of the matter is her, at least a third of her burst damage, I think, usually in most cases, will not have the 50% geo damage bonus with her signature artifacts, which means functionally, I think the damage buff as far as like what my original calcs was comparing to two-piece combos in particular was pretty much a wash. And it's not, 10% is not such a significant buff that like, oh my god, it's going to completely change the calcs that I did. So I'm not going to redo the calcs, is my point. But two-piece combos, and the relevant two-piece combos for Navia is two-piece attack. She's going to scale very well on tech. Two-piece geo, which I don't have because it's two-piece geo. I think the only two-piece geo set, where's my mouse? I think the only two-piece geo set in the game is four-piece Petra, right? Or sorry, the only two-piece is a four-piece. No, the only two-piece is, I believe, two-piece Petra. Four-piece Petra is kind of conceptually interesting too, by the way, because Navia could buff your other damage from your party members. So if you have a really good four-piece Petra, it's potentially relevant for the damage increase from your other characters, conceptually. But I haven't calced it, so I'm not gonna necessarily recommend it, but it's an interesting option. Bolide, probably not, but if you want to do some shenanigans and try to maximize his normal attack damage, it will also make Crystallize stronger. So yeah, two-piece Petra, two-piece attack, so two-piece geo, two-piece attack, and then two-piece skill damage, because particularly that they buffed her skill a little bit recently. Two-piece skill damage in Golden Troop will be relevant too, right? So yeah. And she scales on attacks, so your generic, pieces like this are, the pieces you're chasing. And then you want some ER, so, don't forget, pieces like this might be relevant, because if you have no ER on your other artifacts, having one piece with 20 ER and a little bit of crit might be what you need. So anyways, if you want specific numbers, what my calcs were, it was that two-piece combos, basically any two-piece combo of two-piece skill, two-piece attack, two-piece geo, each one of them was like around 10% worse than her signature artifacts. But oh wait, no, I already mentioned that. I already disclaimed that like I was factoring in, so anyway with it, yeah. So about 10% worse, right? Because of the other artifacts in the domain of these niches hell healing artifacts, like I don't think the new domain is worth farming for her, in my opinion. But it's going to be a similar situation like a Wanderer. If you're really hell-bent on trying to like maximize your Navia, her artifacts are going to be her best option and her most universal option. The most interesting calcs I did, though, other than her like signature versus two-piece combos, so again, any two-piece combo, two-piece skill damage, two-piece, and two-piece skill damage is what, like two-piece skill damage, two-piece attack is what I would do, is because it's what I have. And I have decent options with it, and I think that's what most people would have, because most people have been probably farming a bunch of this domain anyways, right? So it's a lot more likely people have two-piece attack, two-piece skill damage combos versus two-piece geo, two-piece whatever combos, because who farms Petra, right? Not that many people. And anyways, point is, two-piece skill damage, two-piece attack would be my basic recommendation, and stat for stat, it should be about 10% worse than her signature artifacts. But what's interesting, right, she's quick swap. There is I'm not going to recommend this because it's going to make her harder to play. But it's absolutely something I would try, particularly in the context, right, of my Noelle team, right? So my current mono geo or wet rock Noelle team that I've been playing and enjoying a lot with Farina is Noelle, Farina, Yelan, right? And then I use Yunjin because Yunjin can make Noelle get some not insignificant additional damage numbers and also provides an attack speed increase, which makes Noelle feel a little bit better to play to me. I quite like Yunjin, and of course of Geo for Geo Resonance, and then also gives some energy particles for Noelle. Navia has the potential to be used instead of Yunjin, so basically I'm sacrificing some buffing for Noelle and, in the attack speed and normal attack damage bonus in exchange for Navia's own personal damage contribution. Again, though, in this team, I would want to play Navia very quick swap. Like, I would want to swap to Navia, do her skill, swap back to Noelle immediately, and continue doing Noelle's burst, right? That's how it would probably play. I don't know how well it would play in practice, but, obviously I should be able to generate a bunch of crystallizes, and I'm running into enemies, generally speaking, so I should be able to, and doing normal attacks on them to trigger Yelan. So I should be collecting crystallizes while I'm on field with Noelle, and then be able to swap, do an instant shot with Navia in this team, and then swap back to Noelle. And that means that if you're not spending more than 2 seconds on field with Navia, so you fire you fire Navia's skill in 2 seconds or less. Let me go to the screen where it looks better. 4-piece golden troop is good for her. And so good for her that, and actually this was before her skill got buffed, by the way. But 4-piece golden troop can give 70% skill damage bonus. The effect will be cleared 2 seconds after taking the field. That means if you fire her skill within 2 seconds, it has 70% skill damage bonus. So the way that you see the biggest damage number with Navia will be with 4-piece golden troop. Not with her signature artifacts. So like in that Noelle team that I mentioned, right? Assuming I enjoyed feeling out players and whatever, which it might not feel good to play. I don't know, because that's just like down to personal preference in my opinion. But on paper, it should work. I could put 4-piece golden troop on her, and my calcs were that it was like 5% worse, and that was before her skill got buffed significantly by like 150%. So with the buff, I suspect it's more like 3% worse, like 2 to 3% worse than her signature artifacts as far as overall damage contribution goes, right? And the reason that is because if you're not doing Navia's normal attacks, she loses a lot of her potential damage contribution. And in this hypothetical Noelle team, I wouldn't be doing her normal attacks because I'd be using Noelle instead on field, right? For Noelle's normal attacks, right? So use Navia just as swap, bam, do a big gunshot, and get probably like a 100k whatever damage, and there you go. So in that case, 4-piece golden troop, genuinely, I'm not even kidding, would I think be near equivalent to her signature artifacts. But that requires a very specific playstyle, so I'm not going to recommend it, but it's absolutely an option. And it's absolutely something that might be relevant because, you know, if you're like me, you might have spent like 2.5, 3 months in this freaking domain. And you might have a lot of artifacts that are potentially relevant, right? So, yeah, that's kind of what that comes down to. Her signature artifacts will be relegated, in my opinion, for those super dedicated that just want the most universal and versatile artifacts for Navia, because they basically are just artifacts that at this moment say this 4-piece set is for Navia, and they'll be pretty good for her. Probably her best and most versatile ones, if you're using her normal attack and whatever in particular. But yeah. Would Navi be worth without getting any other Geo characters? So I mentioned actually early in the stream, I will go for Navia if Chevreuse is on her banner. We'll talk about Chevreuse shortly. If you look at the Geo characters I have, I leveled up Yunjin, I leveled up Noelle, and nobody else. And I don't plan to get Zhongli, I don't plan to get Albedo, I don't plan to get Ito, I never plan to level up Ito, and I'm probably not going to level Ningguang. So yes. In my opinion, so the biggest selling point, I'm going to repeat the last thing, you know, Navia is versatile. She can work with basically any off-field damage dealer on paper, potentially. So, and has quick swap functionality, which means she can work with other, as long as you're pairing her with units that are friendly to being quick swap a little bit. And depending on how the timing works out, different units, you know, like Nuvilette is probably not going to be ideal, but Nuvilette is a little bit friendly, like to someone that could be quick swap like Navia, and it's just going to kind of depend on like the timings of how things work out. And I don't think it's going to work that well, but it might actually work better than I expect, right? So, and Nuvilette has reasons. Nuvilette himself actually has reasons to like want to throw a Geo unit in the team, right? Yeah, Navia has no inherent heavy need to have another Geo on the team, in my opinion. But Geo Resonance can give Navia not insignificant additional value, so it's not bad to do a second Geo, but in my opinion, it's not needed at all. But yeah. Respectful, screw you. I mean, if it makes you feel better, like, oh, this doesn't make you feel, it's not gonna make you feel better, but like, I got this attack percent sans. I do adore that I got this attack percent sans. This was like one of the first, like I got this within the first couple of days of farming this domain, and I've seen like nothing like it since, and I was just like, holy crap, I cannot believe I got this right away. and then here's my feathers. Like, this is pretty good. I also got this in the first couple of days, believe it or not, and then like, this is my second best one. This is something that's like, if I really need the ER on Farina, this is why I have this artifact. This was actually a 4-line, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, this was a 4-line artifact. So like the stat value on this for Farina is actually really high. It just looks ugly as heck. So it's double min roll, and then it looks super ugly. But this is actually a really good artifact. That's why I'm keeping it. But it's like I really want more skill damage options. I don't even have Fischl on 4-piece yet because circlets hate me. Like here's my best circlet for Farina, and here's my best crit damage circlet. And then Yelan has this one because I was purposely trying to power down Yelan so that like when I was testing Wet Rock, it wasn't like having too much of a noticeable effect from Yelan's Constellation, so I put worse artifacts on her. Anyways. So I think that's all for Farina. Farina. I think that's all for Navia. Any other quick questions before I talk about Chevreuse? Chevreuse should be quicker because she's actually... I don't know, she's more interesting to me as far as like because of the fact that she enables new things that weren't like really relevant at all without Chevreuse existing. But I think she's a little bit simpler on paper to talk about than Navia because she doesn't have as much nuance as far as like talking about the off-field interaction kind of situation. So probably would want to run a Zhongli if using Navia as a main carry. And if your goal is, as I mentioned before in the stream, if your goal is to see the maximum Navia damage possible, yes. But Crystallize has, again, I'm going to show this again. Crystallize scaling at level 90, it absorbs like 2,000 damage before any EM and whatever. So just around 2,000 is the main way to think about it. And if you're generating a bunch of Crystallize constantly, which Navia can do on her own, she can generate a decent amount of, right? That's a lot of damage you're potentially absorbing. And Navia has fairly high base defense herself. And that means like Navia teams are going to be fairly tanky. They're not going to get interrupted much. So the value of putting Zhongli on that team goes down because you don't really... If you have a heavy defensive utility already by nature of having so much Crystallize that you're going to have, you know, good interruption resistance and whatever. Like, I'm not saying it's irrelevant because Zhongli does provide the 20% universal resistance reduction and can theoretically generate more Crystallize himself if the pillar doesn't... I have a passionate hate for Zhongli's pillar, by the way, with this current Abyss cycle on polearms only. The reason I didn't have an edited video this week, by the way, was because I was planning on... I decided earlier this week, I was like, okay, you know what? This Abyss is interesting enough on polearms only. I'm going to make an edited video for this Abyss. I originally said in my live stream last week I wasn't going to make an edited video for the Abyss, but I am. I'm at 12 hours of recording and I have not 36 starred the Abyss. And you want to know why? It's not because of the lectors. It's because Zhongli's fucking pillar breaks when anything touches, when a boss has an animation that goes through it, because Hoyo can't make constructs not garbage, and it pisses me off. So my point with that is that Zhongli's application is shit garbage. He's not going to generate much additional crystallizes for you. He doesn't contribute shit for his own damage. And his burst, like, you won't even want to, like, his burst is the only thing that deals damage, but you won't even want to use it oftentimes in favor of spending more on-field time with, like, Navia or other characters, most likely. So, like, it's bad. His burst is bad, has very minor CC utility, and it's like you'll never use it technically. He's bad at generating energy, and he's bad at, you know, keeping tenacity buff up because of the pillar, and he's bad at generating or doing any crystallize additionally because of the pillar. So like, and he doesn't like it. I don't know. I think Zhongli is not that relevant of a teammate with her personally because of crystallize having defensive relevance. So like, yeah. I don't know. I don't like the idea of Zhongli with her personally. I like the idea of Albedo much more, but it's not like it'll be bad. It will result in a bigger Navia damage number because of the resistance reduction. At least. So again, like if your goal is hyper carry Navia and buff Navia as much as possible, it's probably Xiangling, Bennett, Zhongli, Navia for you. But if you want to do that, I think that's kind of boring, and I think it's not the most interesting use of Navia personally to me. So, but yeah, I think that, have I talked about Navia, Petra on Nuvilet and Farina teams? I mentioned Petra on Navia very briefly. It is a potential interesting option. I'm not going to say it's something you will necessarily want to do, particularly unless you already have like Petra for some reason that you farmed because you're a mad lad. So anyways, let's talk about Chevreuse. I don't know how to pronounce her name properly. I don't care. 12k base HP. She's split scaling, by the way. That's her Chevrouse's biggest problems are split scaling. Fairly low base attack, fairly low base defense, but I don't think she's the lowest in any category. Has HP scaling. But for once, you know, like if we compare, let's go open up, you know, Candace. This is the thing that annoys me the most about Candace. Hoyo made Candace an HP. Whoa, my internet. That why is it taking so long to load an image? Candace is an HP scaler, but they gave her 10,800 HP. Like I hate when Hoyo does this crap, and it's the same thing with like freaking Charlotte. Is my internet working? Stream's still going. Okay. Charlotte has literally like the 3rd or 4th lowest base attack in the game, and she's an attack scaling character. Screw you, Mario. Stop doing this crap. Anyway, Chevreuse does have some HP scaling, but they didn't give her like the lowest base HP in the game. Wow. That's a sarcastic clap, but like that's the bar for 4 stars. Like Jesus. I gotta make sure I don't show icons. I swear to God, if I because I showed like a brief screen of Navia's splash art, if I get DMCA'd by whoever, I'm gonna be so salty. Well, anyways, I might have to edit the stream later in YouTube's dashboard to like remove the very brief bit where I showed Navia's splash art by accident. So, anyways, the split scaling I don't think is that problem because the split scaling in Chevreuse's case, so Chevreuse she heals based on HP and she deals damage based on attack. I think with Chevreuse Constellations, particularly once you get C4, is when you might actually want to build her for damage, potentially, over healing. But before C4, I think oh, frick me, man. I keep on clicking to tabs by habit. I click this thing over here, and I need to, like, click on my different tabs. Otherwise, I need to, like, reset all my things here. So, anyways, hopefully Hoyo doesn't smite me. We'll see. We'll see. You know, Hoyo doesn't want people actually talking about characters and getting interested in them before release, because why would they want people to talk about and be interested in their game? That sounds like nonsense to me. Delete that, delete this, delete that. So, anyways, I don't know. They're obviously on the stream now, so maybe I shouldn't even bother, but I am anyways, just in case. Just in case. Someone from Hoyo watching, there you go. There's nothing here, no imagery I'm using from you. So yeah, her healing anyways is HP scaling, right? And actually I'll go to level 12 because Constellations. Her normal attacks aren't relevant. There we go. So the number one thing I can say about Chevreuse is that she actually seems like a competent 4-star at C0. Like she seems functional for what she's meant to do at C0. What she is meant to do is not necessarily going to be like, oh my god, this character's super relevant. And like a super meta new 4-star. We're back to the days of getting meta 4-stars. This is official tier Shangling. No. I want to preface this because I am very enthused and very interested about Chevreuse. I like her a lot. I actually like her more than Navia. And the reason is because she's made to make Overload more relevant, right? And the fact of the matter is that by nature of making Overload more relevant, right? Like, if you ever had the conception before being like, I want to do an Overload team. There's basically no benefit to doing that before, other than, like, early game. Early game, I think Overload does have relevance and will maintain its relevance. But, like, as you get later into the game and more invested, it just, like, falls off because the knockback is problematic and it just doesn't do enough damage to be relevant. But it's not insignificant damage. Like, Overload is not insignificant in teams that are doing a bunch of transformative reactions. So, there's a number of, like, Dendro team variations that end up having, like, incidental Overload damage. When you put a Pyro member in, like, in a flex slot. And, like, I made a Dory video with the Theorycrafter Binge, if you've seen it on my Discord server. And that Dory team gets a not insignificant amount of Overload damage, potentially. And that's relevant. But normally you don't have a conception of, I want to make an Overload team, right? You don't do that. So Chevreuse makes that much more relevant than it used to be before. And I'm going to talk about this specifically in the context of polearms only a little bit, because the fact of the matter is, I can see at least 2, maybe 3 team options that Chevreuse will uniquely enable on polearms only that should be competent enough to clear mini abyss cycles, and notably may actually make a certain neglected character on polearms only relevant. And like if Chevreuse can make a team relevant on polearms only that was not possible or relevant before, that's a cool 4-star and a cool character in my opinion. And yeah, and I disagree with the Jeff's mentality that like you need C6 for her to be relevant. Like one thing that's funny to me that like Jeff was like comparing Chevreuse to Kazuha, and like a lot of people are comparing Chevreuse to Kazuha in the context of like Raiden hypercarry teams, because without getting into the details yet, Chevreuse with her C6, with Chevreuse C6 and Chevreuse's passive, she provides a similar amount of damage value to your on-field damage dealer as Kazuha does. But she does it in a different way. And you lose the grouping, but if you're doing overload anyways, right? If you're doing Raiden Hyper, you're doing overload usually. You are not necessarily going to care that much about the grouping aspect of Kazuha, in my opinion. You are losing out on the damage contribution from Kazuha. But I don't know. The fact that a 4-star is being compared to Kazuha. Like Kazuha. Like what? Excuse me? Kazuha. We're comparing a 4-star to Kazuha. The fact that we're making that comparison at all is something that actually make you go, huh, in your head, in my opinion. Is she actually going to be relevant? No, because Overload still has problems, right? Overload knocking back enemies is problematic. I again, I don't want to overstate like, oh my god, she's Kazuha tier. That's not what I'm saying. But it is interesting the fact that we're comparing her to Kazuha, right? And the reason people are comparing her to Kazuha is because she gets like 60% skill damage bonus with her, or skill damage, 60% up to 60% damage bonus with her C6. But then her passive here, basically when the character triggers Overload for 6 seconds, and this is specifically on individual enemies, so you have to trigger Overload on an enemy. The Pyro and Electro res of the opponents affected by the Overload reaction will be decreased by 40% for 6 seconds. And notably, by the way, Overload counts as Pyro damage, even though it has like a different color number, it counts as Pyro damage. So this does increase your Overload damage. And this effect will be removed after, you know, you have to have all, the notable thing with this, it's a Nilou type passive where you have to have all Pyro and Electro party members to get this passive, which in my opinion is fine. It's not as bad as Nilou's because Nilou is forced into her playstyle. Chevreuse is a 4-star versus a 5-star, and this is a C0 4-star ability, right? If this was Chevreuse's C6, I'd be a bit annoyed by it. But it's Chevreuse's passive. So the number one thing that would make me start hating on Chevreuse, by the way, is if they swapped her C6 and her passive. That's my number one concern in the beta, is if they swap them. But Chevreuse got basically no changes in the first beta patch that you would expect normally to see the biggest changes from. So I am relatively comfortable thinking that this is how Chevreuse is going to be. And I think she is actually fairly balanced for what she's meant to be. Because again, like, Chevreuse is not going to be like so insanely relevant. I don't want to overstate that. Like, Overload still is going to be not amazing. But she's making Overload more relevant than it was before. And is going to enable new interesting team options of like just full Electro Pyro compositions that didn't have relevance before that might have more relevance now. Like Overload teams, when you're going on the paper, drawing on paper, I want to do Raiden plus Official plus, you know, Xiangling plus another Pyro, in this case it would be Chevreuse, right? You know, that's going to be a more relevant team combination than it was before, right? By the way, the Chevreuse, I think, is genuinely going to make a Xiangling, like a Xiangling without Bennett, a lot more relevant. VV is not 60%, VV is 40%. So this shred is the same as VV, but just requires triggering Overload rather than doing Swirl. So it's easier to trigger than VV, and I think that's relevant too. Like, it's just, you're doing Electro and Pyro damage on an enemy, and you will have this shred going, right? Yeah, and that's basically all it is, and that's important. Her second passive, by the way, Pyro and Electro party members, and this works without having all Pyro and Electro party members, which is notable. So you could use her just like as a generic healer if you want, but her healing is really not very good. At C6, it's potentially not irrelevant because her C6 gives her a little bit of a team-wide heal, but I do not recommend. Oh, actually, asterisk. I actually haven't seen clarification. So, if Chevreuse's healing triggers multiple times based on her C4, but I'll talk about her C4. Her C4 is really interesting. I'd actually have to go double check if her healing procs multiple times with her C4. If Chevreuse's healing procs multiple times with her C4, then with her C4 she becomes a much more relevant healer. But basically before C4 and before C6, like her main relevance is just her, overload passive. It's just this passive basically. Her damage contribution and whatever else she does is not nearly as relevant before that. Her C2 is a little bit relevant, potentially, keeping up overload, keeping up her passive more, but like, yeah. Anyway, she can increase attack up to 40% if she has like 40,000 HP. It's going to be not easy to get her to have 40,000 HP, but it's not that crazily hard. Like when I checked on like a full HP percent build, with her 12k HP and 24% HP ascension, I don't think I calced with Black Tassel or anything. She's a polearm. Oh frick, I'm showing Chevreuse's. God dang it, man. Whatever. I give up at this point. I'll just freaking cut out this part of the stream if I need to. Whatever, it's fun. The blah 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 blah. Chevreuse can increase your attack on your party members, and this means like particularly before C4. Like I think it just makes sense to build her as a healer, even if her healing is not that relevant, because it might be at least enough to keep you alive, and as long as if it's enough to keep you alive, as long as you don't have Farina on the team, which you usually won't with Chevreuse, right? Then that's enough healing. That's all it comes down to. And then, giving an attack bonus to your characters that actually have relevant damage, giving 35% attack bonus, or I didn't even finish. So with Chevreuse's like 12k HP, you should be able to see like 35k, and it is relatively easy to get, and that's like without Black Tassel, if I recall. So 40k is doable. It's not that hard from what I count. But if you're using Fav Lance on her, which you very likely will end up being, then you might put a crit rate circlet on her to enable Fav Lance to be triggered more often, which means it's going to be harder to get 30, up to 40k, and you might be more like sitting at a 30k Chevreuse. It depends on your build you have going. She can be built a little bit more for healing, built a little bit more for this attack buff on her passive, which is full HP, and she can be built for damage. And I think her damage is mostly relevant with her Constellation 4, though. And anyway, so as far as her damage goes, she has a relatively high multiplier, so like level 10 in her burst, you can see, actually, we'll go to level 12. So this would be like level 9 plus like C3 or C5, I don't know which is which. It's snowing outside where I'm living. Ooh. So yeah, 736%, and then this 98%, she has 8 little bombs that spawn, kind of like Kirara, right? Kirara has 8 little bombs that spawn, but Kirara's only deal damage when like enemies walk over them or whatever, so they oftentimes just do nothing. Whereas Chevreuse's actually automatically explode, so they're more likely to deal damage, but there is also the effect of like, you're not always going to get 98% times 8 damage from the bombs, because again, overload's going to be going on most of the time when you're in teams with that, so if you do her burst and knocks them away, and then the 8 little grenades explode after you activate her burst, might knock back the enemy further. So I highly doubt, again, unless you're against bosses that can't get knocked back, I highly doubt you're always going to get the full 98% times 2. But the full damage contribution that you can get from her burst is not insignificant potentially. So the main relevance to it, though, is just like it's a little bit of pyro and a little bit of additional damage. But unlike someone like Farazan, you don't need her burst for her kit. Like her burst is just like additional damage, additional pyro, additional overloads, right? Yeah, you could do potentially Linny overload. The only thing with like doing Linny is Linny wants to maintain a pyro aura on the enemy to get additional damage. So you need to make sure you use an electro character that does not apply so much, like Fischl, for example, would probably be bad. As long as you use an electro character that does not overwrite your existing electro aura, or sorry, your existing pyro aura, Linny and Chevreuse could potentially be relevant together. Is kind of what it'd be. The only problem is like, who do you, if you're doing like Linny, Chevreuse, Xiangling, well, now you need to put an electro to get relevance for the pyro resistance reduction, right? So okay, now you don't have Bennett. Okay, well how about Bennett instead of Xiangling? Well, yeah. So, anyways, it's not necessarily going to be that much of an upgrade because most likely it means sacrificing Bennett. It is kind of the vibe I would get. So I'm not going to say it's going to be that relevant, but it's a potential option, and it might be relevant with her C6 in particular. But I'm not going to recommend trying to pull Chevreuse specifically for Linny. I don't think it would work that well personally, because you'd have to sacrifice someone in order to force it just for the 40% resistance reduction, and like, why would you do that versus just using an animal unit, right? Because if you're doing mono pyro anyways, doing Bennett, Xiangling, Linny, why not just do an anima unit? Right? Like, again, like, I don't know. Versus having to force an electro unit into a Linny team, an electro unit that doesn't apply much electro, and then, I don't know, it's not going to be necessarily irrelevant. It's interesting as on a baseline of it being a new damage, a new team option for Linny potentially, but like, I'm not going to recommend it. Her skill is pretty simple. Basically, she fires a gun like Navia, but it does one, as long as you trigger to overload. Basically, when a character triggers overload, she gets the overcharge. She gets these overcharge balls, and then it gets higher damage. If you didn't have overload trigger and she doesn't have a ball, then it only does 300% versus 500%, and that's 564 at level 10, level 12. And then healing is 5.3% HP plus a little bit. And then healing duration is 12 seconds, and there's a 2-second interval in these heals. So she only heals like 6 times, and that's 6 times to only the active character. So it's not much healing, basically. You can do the math. Like if you have like a healing build on Chevreuse, like a maximized healing build when I calculated out before was something like 5k ticks per heal or something. So 5k per 2 seconds to your active character. It's not much. I mean, it's not insignificant, to be clear. It's going to depend on who you're pairing her with. Like it's enough that you can use her as your healer. So like, that's relevant. It's a relevant reason. I like that she has healing in her kit, because it means like you don't need to like shoehorn Bennett into a overload Chevreuse team just for the fact that Bennett gives attack buff and healing. Instead, and particularly like Bennett is not going to be that relevant with Chevreuse because overload's going to knock things out of like Bennett's AoE, right? So you're not going to get that much potential value out of Bennett's attack buff, which means Chevreuse healing is really nice to keep your team alive potentially. And that's basically how to treat her healing, in my opinion. And that's all there is to it. With C6, she becomes a little bit better of a healer, and she has like team-wide healing, but it's not like, again, it's only like one instance of AoE 10% healing. And it's a delayed heal too, which is a little bit weird, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of interesting. So yeah, she can deal a not insignificant instance of damage, but like it's not like, oh my god, the multipliers that Chevreuse's own personal damage contribution is so significant that it matters a lot. It's really not that relevant, at least pre C4. With C4 it becomes relevant. So anyway, C1 is interesting. So basically the on-field character that has that triggers overload on an opponent, they will recover 6 energy. I really like this constellation because that means, like, for example, I think people, yeah, this only affects the on-field character, but like if you have Xiangling, for example, right, and you switch to Xiangling and there's Electro on the enemy and you activate Xiangling's burst, she's probably going to trigger overload like at least once or whatever, right? Hopefully twice, and how many exactly in practice it'll end up being, I don't know. I haven't thought about that much in depth, but like you'll probably at least trigger this passive once, even though Xiangling is, you know, and that's 6 energy for Xiangling, and then you go to your active character, and your active character, like let's say you're doing Hyper Raiden, right? You're doing Hyper Carry Raiden, and where you're using Chevreuse instead of Kazuha, and that's relevant, by the way. Like even if you don't have C6 Chevreuse, C6 Chevreuse is gonna probably be worse than Kazuha or sorry, a non-C6 Chevreuse is going to be worse than Kazuha in a hypercarry Raiden team, but that frees up Kazuha for the other side of Abyss. That's very irrelevant in my opinion. So if you're someone who really likes playing like hypercarry Raiden with like Raiden, Sara, Bennett, now you have new team options for hypercarry Raiden. And I think that's awesome, potentially. So overvape, I mean, the problem, no, basically you don't get Chevreuse's passive unless you're doing full Electro and Pyro. Remember the 40% res reduction. So with C6, Chevreuse might become a relevant support because C6 does not require her passive. C6 just gives Pyro and Electro bonus after a party member is healed and the healing just happens after you fire her skill, right? So with C6, Chevreuse might become relevant for weird other team variations, but like I'm gonna be talking about Chevreuse really specifically in the Overload context, like what she's meant to be doing, because what she's meant to be doing is new, and I like that. So anyways, I like this constellation. So this just reduces energy needs, so it can be triggered once every 10 seconds. And I don't know, it's not like wildly crazy or anything, but I think it's a cool constellation, because normally we have constellations that's like, this constellation reduces this character's energy cost from being stupidly high to just high. Charlotte C4. Like I swear to God, like almost every character they're releasing, 5 stars and 4 stars, but 4 stars it's more egregious because they put a C4 like Charlotte, where it's just like, yes, thanks for having this character have crap energy generation, like particle generation, and then giving them a freaking C4 that reduces their energy cost to like not horrifyingly large amounts, right? So like I like this constellation for being a supportive, relevant constellation that makes Chevreuse do additional things that's not just relevant to herself. And like, this character refunds energy to their burst. That, this means that they should have had a lower burst cost in their base kit. Yay! Chevreuse generates 4 particles on her skill cast. C4 does not. C4 lets you use additional skills, but it doesn't. There's a cooldown on her particle generation that there usually is. So her energy cost is gonna be variable depending on the team. I suspect most of the time Chevreuse is not gonna be very energy hungry because you're using other Pyro and Electro characters with her. So anyways, C2 is interesting. It's additional damage. Most relevant, it's like more overloads potentially, right? So after using her skill, her hold skill, and hitting a target, you trigger some chain explosions on the location where said target is hit, and deals 120% of Chevreuse's attack, and it can be triggered once up to every 10 seconds for 2 explosions. So that's 240% total multiplier value, and it's considered elemental skill damage. This additional damage is additional overloads that can keep up her passive more potentially. This is potentially the only real form of off-field damage she deals, because it triggers, it says chain explosions. I don't know if I've actually seen footage of it yet. And I don't know, it's kind of off-field, but it's not really off-field. It's not that relevant. It's kind of boring. It might be more relevant than I expect for just triggering her passive or whatever. But that's kind of it, in my opinion. Dramatic Fontaine music in the background. C4 is her most interesting constellation. I like her C4 more than her C6, honestly. Her C6 is probably stronger on paper, to be clear, but C4 is more interesting to me. I really, really like this kind of design for a C4. Again, this isn't like something you fundamentally need for her kit, but after using her burst, the cooldown for Chevreuse's using hold on her skill is decreased by 100%. 100% decrease is 0, by the way. That means she has no cooldown on her skill. This effect is removed after you use it twice using hold or after 6 seconds. So that means within 6 seconds after using Chevreuse's burst, you can fire off 2 more of Chevreuse's skill, which does, if you have overload triggered, does 560% damage at level 12, which might not be level 12, around 500% damage, we'll say. So that's an additional 1,000% damage, and that's additional overloads. And I don't know. Let's just go to. I think this is Homcat. Let's go to Chevreuse here. Hopefully they won't smite me, but at this point, they might smite me anyways. Heal interval. Okay, no, I don't think. I'm just looking for technical data here. I don't think Homcat actually said whether or not. So the thing that I'm not sure about, right, is Chevreuse Chevrouse's skill basically specifically says if Chevreuse has an overcharged ball, then she will fire blah 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 blah. And for a short duration after Chevreuse fires a shot, that's the 12 seconds. So for 12 seconds, she will heal. She will continuously restore HP to your active character on field. Well, her C4 says she gets 2 additional skill uses, right? I mentioned before, like, her healing is kind of whatever, not very much without her thing. So if she can get, functionally this is 2 more skills, right? 2 more skills in 6 seconds, and with her C4. Based on the phrasing of her burst, you know, that means you're also triggering her healing again. And I don't know if that, but I don't know if it stacks. Homcat has not clarified if it stacks, and nothing in Chevreuse's kit says if it stacks or not, right? That's what I was checking for over here quick. Normally Homcat would put that info in this page if you go to character.wiki. But anyways, if it is relevant, if it does make her heal more, which I think it might, because I think what it might be, right? If you look at her C6 gives pyro and elemental damage bonus based on once you've been healed by a party member from her skill. And her skill only heals every 2 seconds, right? And that means like you only get 60% pyro damage bonus, and you get it for 8 seconds, max 3 stacks, and each stack's duration is counted independently. That means you only have 60% pyro damage bonus with an uptime of like 4 seconds. And then you go down to 40% unless you get healed again. So like you would have, it would take you 6 seconds out of the 12-second duration for her healing, and then this you'd have like probably 50% uptime. I don't feel like doing the exact math. You probably have like 50 to 60% uptime on 60% damage bonus for your active character, but they have to be healed 3 times, and it does count over healing, and it also does count this healing that happens after her healing ends. So this extends the 20-second for another 8 seconds, right? So it's a very good constellation. It will increase your active damage dealers like damage quite significantly. But the reason I think it's relevant in conjunction with C4 is because if C4 stacks, wherein you do something like you use Chevreuse's burst, or sorry, you use Chevreuse's skill into her burst, and then you do 2 more skills, that will end up having a sequence where you're gonna have, if her healing instances are all separate, you'll have like a healing that's happening every 2 seconds from her first skill, healing that's happening every 2 seconds from her second skill, healing that's happening every 2 seconds from her third skill, which means you're going to have 3 instances of healing happening very rapidly close to each other, like with maybe like 1 second or 2 second delays. It's going to be slightly delayed potentially because of the fact of the burst animation or whatever, right? But the vibe I'm getting, assuming that it stacks, right? Assuming that you get the healing in multiple instances, one, that makes her a lot better healer with C4. That makes her a lot better healer with C4. Again, still only active character, but there's a lot of additional healing. That's functionally 15%. Like her total healing, if we do, like, let's assume you have like 30k HP or like a healing bonus circlet or something. So we're gonna say 4.8% of her HP plus 564 at level 10. So 0.048 times 30,000 HP, and 30,000 would be a low amount, right? I'm gonna be pessimistic here. Plus 564, and whoops, that's times 564, 1440. Plus 564, and it should be very easy. For my calcs, it was not that hard to get like a healing build going on Chevreuse. Like if you're a healing maximized build on Chevreuse, when I was checking with like 4-piece maidens, could heal like 5k per tick, right? This is much lower than that. So this is a pessimistic assumption with a much lower amount of HP, but still with like a healing bonus circlet. So that's 2,000, and then times the 1.359 with a healing bonus circlet. That's 2,700 per heal, per healing tick, and that's 6 ticks of healing times 6. So Chevreuse heals 16,000 HP to your active character over the duration of her skill, which for most, like for like the likes of like Yai, Miko, whatever, that's, you know, enough to full heal your active character. But then if her C4 triggers the healing again, and instead of, it doesn't just like extend the duration, instead it stacks, then that's 3 times the healing. Now she heals 49,000, and she can have rapid ticks of it. And that would also mean that you get her C6 stacks, assuming you had her C6. That would mean you get stacks in her C6 much faster as well to your active character, which means more uptime on 60% pyro damage bonus and electro damage bonus. And that is significant. Like C4 retro, if C4 stacks the healing instances, that retroactively makes C6 much stronger and makes her healing much stronger. And C4 also increases her potential damage contribution, making building her for damage more relevant too, right? So C4, in my opinion, is the interesting constellation, but with the big asterisk of we need to know if it stacks on her healing instances or not, because that changes the dynamic of like how long it takes to get your damage bonus with C6 up, and it changes how relevant her healing might be, because like having 3 separate instances of the healing going potentially for your active character means you could like swap to your other character that's low health. Let's say Kooky. Kooky's an electro character that you might put with a team like this for whatever reason. And she's oftentimes at low health because you like use Kooky's skill. She eats 30% of her health, right? And then you swap to someone else. So Kooky's often does that low. With Chevreuse, if Chevreuse has multiple instances of her healing up with C4, you could swap to Kooky, and even with Chevreuse not on a healing build, Kooky would probably heal like 8,000 HP back or something, right? Like very quickly, just by like in the time frame of you swapping into Kooky and reactivating her skill, Kooky might be healed back up. And like again, it can potentially make her a way more relevant healer. So I don't know. Her constellations are very interesting, is my point, because they accent Chevreuse's utility, but I don't think they're required for her. Because again, at a baseline, Chevreuse enables overload teams to be more relevant than they were before on a conceptual basis. And now I think I'm done with Amber. The main illustration I would have of this is with Sino, right? I haven't seen a chat message for a little bit. I should reset my chat. Oh, no one messaged. Did everyone just stop watching my stream or something when I talked about Chevreuse? That might be it. I don't know. Anyways, whatever. So, it still says I have 53 viewers. I guess it's fine. 63 viewers. Just no one's messaging. That's fine. Okay. So, thanks for the... Yeah, I know. I'm a beautiful artist. It's my beautiful art. Also, Chevreuse UI official flex. It would be interesting. I don't know. Like, I haven't done much of a lot of math, because, like, the problem with like calculating for Chevreuse is you got to do like full team damage calculations, and full team damage calculations are weird because it's so situational, man. As far as Yoimiya goes, Yoimiya has problems that are Yoimiya problems. So I'm not gonna say Chevreuse is gonna make like Yoimiya good, but again, it's going to be new options for Yoimiya, and particularly if you ever C6, obviously. So I don't know, and it means like one thing I don't like about Yoimiya when I tested her before is Yoimiya has circle impact problems with Bennett, and like because Yoimiya, you know, like Kirara jumps forward when she's doing her normal attacks. If I recall correctly, Yoimiya jumps backwards, and like a not insignificant amount backwards when she's doing her normal attacks, and that can make her like go out of Bennett's burst, and like it means you have to like spend time like moving forward again, which can delay like your sequencing it when you get vapes on Yoimiya or whatever. So like the concept of doing an overload Yoimiya instead of doing a vape Yoimiya, I think is interesting. Again, it's like new team options that potentially weren't really relevant at all before that might be relevant now. So that's what I think is interesting, but I have not done personal calcs to try to compare what's Yoimiya's potential team damage output with a Chevreuse C6 or not C6 compared to a vape Yoimiya. On paper, I almost assure you vape Yoimiya is probably better, but in practice it might have less annoying issues than vape Yoimiya has, and because it might just be like easier to play, and like overload knocking back with enemies with Yoimiya won't be as much of a problem because Yoimiya is a range damage dealer, right? She just spams her normal attacks, so you can trigger overload from a range as long as Official's A4 is still within range, right? So it's an interesting option, right? Any Electro party member, Electro character, Electro or Pyro character in the game now potentially has relevance to be used with Chevreuse in a team that really wouldn't have like conceptually been relevant before. And it's not like Chevreuse is gonna make it, oh, now suddenly it's good, but it's gonna be better than it was before without Chevreuse existing. And at a baseline with her C0 kit. Chances are, though, like realistically, chances are in practice, you're gonna want C6 Chevreuse to like really make those teams shine, is my guess. If you want my safe bet. But I really appreciate that Chevreuse is a C0 4-star that has, like, for what she's intended to be able to do, she functions at C0, and you don't need her constellations. That's what I like. I think it's crazy that that's the bar, to be clear. Like, our bar is like, hey, we got a functional C0 4-star for once. Wow. But, like, anyways, I don't know. She's a C0 4-star that enables new teams that weren't as relevant before without her existing. I'm going to talk about Cyno real briefly in the context of poems only. It's the most interesting thing, right? So, and this is with like a C0 Chevreuse, by the way. Her passive just requires overload happening. Cyno's biggest problem is the fact that like his burst can last. His burst basic duration is 10 seconds, but then I think his passive or whatever, he extends his burst duration up to like 18 seconds on paper. But then because of hit lag in practice, the dude actually has a burst that can last longer than his cooldown. So like he can spend 20 seconds in his burst. And so Cyno's biggest problem is the like lack of potential teammates that can sustainably give him benefit through his full burst duration, right? And usually that means Cyno teams, like if you're playing a traditional Cyno aggravate team, for example, Cyno's like I'd say intended to aggravate. But if you're playing a traditional Cyno team, like with Nahida or whatever, you oftentimes have to swap out and end Cyno's burst, like say 12 to 15 seconds into his burst, even though it can last another 5 seconds longer and that you get more damage as Cyno. What you have to do is end his burst early to go like restart your Nahida application or restart your Hydro if you're doing like a quick bloom variation or whatever else, right? Overload Cyno I think is potentially relevant because Cyno was already made to be a unit that like scales on EM, right? He has this passive where his damage values increase based on his EM, and particularly if you have his signature weapon, right? He gets bonus damage based on EM. EM will increase overload damage, and he's already kind of jumping around and moving a lot and causing a lot of knockback on enemies, but I don't think the knockback caused by overload will be that problematic. It might be annoying. It'll depend on the situation, but like overload is interesting in that like you can also use it to group enemies, right? Like I think people underestimate the fact that you can use overload to group and not just ungroup enemies, right? Like, yes, grouping enemies together with Kazuo and then triggering overload, blowing them all apart is bad. But you can also, if enemies are like lined up in a line, you can go to the side of one of those enemies and specifically like knock them towards the other enemies, right? And you can then like dash to the other side and then knock them the other way again and like dash, knock them. So it's interesting, right? Point is like, Cyno already has inherent scaling. And yes, against bosses, you don't have to worry about the overload at all. Cyno already has inherent additional value from Elemental Mastery by getting bonus damage. And can apply a not insignificant amount of Electro, which means a not insignificant amount of overloads. So, and then he doesn't have to worry about, and Chevreuse's passive doesn't care about duration. It just requires having full Electro and Pyro party members. So you just have to have Chevreuse in the party and she will give 40% resistance reduction, right? Because a problem with Cyno is like he lasts like 20 seconds on his burst potentially, and VV, right? If we go to, where's my Kazuha? If we go to Kazuha, right? 4P, the reason like VV is normally not super relevant with Cyno, that's not showing my Kazuha build, that's just showing Kazuha's kit. Is because VV you normally need to swap into, right? It lasts 10 seconds. You need to go and swirl Electro every 10 seconds. That means, you know, more than half of Cyno's burst duration, you're not getting VV. So it's like not super relevant to do unless you're ending Cyno's burst very early. But functionally, you're getting that resistance reduction throughout the entire duration of Cyno's burst. And And then this also brings relevance, right? So like, okay, what other long duration characters would be pyro electro characters would be relevant? Not Yai. Yai would be not that relevant. Not necessarily official. Official wouldn't necessarily be bad, to be clear. It would still be an interesting option. But the one and only, you know, Xiangling, it's always Xiangling. And playing Xiangling without what's their bucket, Bennett might be annoying. You might still want to play Bennett. You could just do Bennett, Xiangling, Chevreuse, Sino would probably be competent. And you would basically not have Bennett there for Sino, but you'd have Bennett there for Xiangling to be able to snapshot Bennett and just be able to be a battery. I personally would probably put a second Electro in over Bennett, personally. But I don't know what Xiangling's energy requirements would look like in that team. The point is, Xiangling, assuming you have C4, to be clear, but like Xiangling is like, if you want to make use of Xiangling in basically any Xiangling team, you want C4. Extends duration by 40%. Xiangling's burst duration is 14 seconds, which is not insanely high, but it's long enough to get a meaningful enough value out of it to get a lot of overloads out. I swear to God, Xiangling's burst duration feels like it lasts longer than 14 seconds most of the time. But that's just actually to like show you how freaking long Sino's burst lasts. Like the fact that Sino's burst can last 20 seconds, and the fact that like Xiangling's burst feels like it lasts a long time with C4. And then Sino's burst lasts another like 50% longer than that is stupid. But anyways, you still not necessarily going to not want, you still might end up ending Sino's burst early, assuming you got his energy back kind of thing. But I don't know, like the core idea of doing Sino, Chevreuse, and Xiangling, especially me with the Polar Molny account, being like, wait a minute, Sino has like new real options now. And that's crazy. And then there's also Toma, by the way, for polearms, who's I would probably end up using Toma or Raiden, realistically. Raiden would be for more overloads, but like you wouldn't really use Raiden's burst that much in a Sino team, right? So like, I don't know. Anyway, it would be weird to basically use Raiden. Raiden would just be there, but it might be relevant to choose over Sino, depending on how I end up playing it, but I imagine Toma, just for like the interruption resistance, might be the best option. Where the frick is Toma? I don't have C6 Toma on my Polar Molny account, but C6 Toma does buff normal and charge attack damage by 15 seconds whenever you refresh his burst. And I think with, with C2, I think C2 increases his burst duration by 3 seconds. And then, yeah, C1 reduces the cooldown by 3 seconds. So functionally, Sino's... oh god, I forgot how Sino's... Toma's burst lasts 18 seconds, right? So that's additional off-field pyro too. So like, I have a feasible Polar Molny team that can like sustain some application and overloads going throughout most of Sino's burst duration, right? Like at least 75% of it. And I don't know, like that's far more relevant than the problems like Aggravate Sino has in general. Like I honestly think Aggravate Sino or Overload Sino with Chevreuse is going to be a very relevant new like breath of life into Sino that he really needed, in my opinion. Because I think Aggravate Sino is problematic. Like, because in multi-wave content you have the problem of like, Nahid is really good with Sino, except for like, lol, you killed all the enemies that Nahida put her skill on, and now you're stuck in Sino's 20-second burst, so your choice is to do non-aggravate damage in your aggravate team for like 10 seconds, or to end Sino's burst like 5 seconds after you first activated it to be able to reapply Nahida's skill in multi-wave content, and that just feels like crap. And like you can use like characters like Baiju, and that helps a little bit, but like Baiju wants to use like 2 skills per rotation for his energy needs not to be stupid. So like, and he's a 5-star, right? So like, I don't know. I think it's really, really interesting. Sino in particular. Raiden Hyper again. Like I think Raiden Hyper potentially getting Chevreuse even without again C6 Chevreuse. I think Raiden Hyper is a relevant option because if you play Raiden, Sara, Bennett, now you could do and Kazuha. Now you can do Raiden, Sara, Bennett, and Chevreuse. Instead of Kazuha, and that's not necessarily an upgrade, and Kazuha is probably still better, both because of Kazuha's own damage contribution, and because if you don't have C6 Chevreuse is probably not going to contribute the same amount of damage buffing, but it frees up Kazuha for another team. Kazuha is a very valuable character to have a mini teams, so if you really like Hypercarry Raiden, and like that team, but have felt like you would really like to have Kazuha on the other side of Abyss while you have Hyper Raiden on one side, Chevreuse can enable that, right? Like, more options is good, especially more options that might free up a very very valuable unit like Kazuha. So, yeah, I don't know. I really like Chevreuse for that, basically. I certainly plan to try to at least get her C0, which, you know, that can be painful for 4 stars on my main account here, just because I want to mess around with it and see, you know, on fully unlocked, right? Like, I don't know. I can give you, like, specific examples, and I can't, like, there's potential shenanigans I might try with Hu Tao. The problem with Hu Tao on polearms only, at least with Chevreuse, is that, like, I have good options for Pyro. I don't have much options for, like, Electro. Like Cyno and Raiden are my off-field, are my Electro units, and Cyno's an on-field Electro. Raiden is an off-field Electro, but doesn't do that much actual instances of Electro application, so I don't know how relevant, like, Raiden would be on a Hu Tao team with Chevreuse, realistically. But it would be an interesting option to try at the very least, versus, like, putting Shao on VV. But in general, Chevreuse for Hu Tao is not a thing. It's just, like, it might be slightly more of a thing on polearms only, but I wouldn't recommend it, and it's probably not going to work well. But then Hypercarry Raiden actually might be relevant as well, genuinely, because Hypercarry Raiden, I don't have Bennett, I don't have Sara, right? Like, I don't have Kazuha, so, like, Hypercarry Raiden just doesn't work on polearms only. But with Chevreuse, Hypercarry Raiden might actually work. So, it might work to a degree that it's, like, worth playing as a team option. And that's super cool. Like, I did not expect for a minute that, like, the last 4-star before polearms only that we got was a freaking Mika. And, like, Mika's got some new life breathed into them with Farina, but other than that, like, is what Mika is. So them releasing Chevreuse and, like, holy crap, a C0 4-star might be relevant for polearms only and might, like, literally enable more new teams than any other individual polearm unit has enabled for me. Like, so, like, I want C6 Chevreuse on polearms only, and if she's on Navia's banner, I might be getting a couple copies of Navia on polearms only. Like, I genuinely might say, I might decide to get C6 Chevreuse instead of C2 Raiden. But I'm really hoping I don't have to make that decision. I'm really hoping, because I think it would make sense. It would make sense to put Chevreuse on the Electro Carries banner, because it does seem like a lot of things about Chevreuse were designed in mind with the Hypercarry Raiden, right? I feel like Chevreuse is kind of like Mihoyo's response to be like, ah, crap. Everyone's playing Hyper Bloom Raiden because it's just better than Carry Raiden. So let's release a character that makes Carry Raiden slightly more relevant again. So if they put Chevreuse not on Raiden's banner, I'm gonna be a little bit of a salty boy. But the upside would be I would get more Constellations for Chevreuse if on my main account if Chevreuse is on Navia's banner, and I would probably get Navia too on my main account. So you know what? I'm in a win-win when it comes to Chevreuse. I either win on my polearm account and lose on my main account, or I win on my main account and lose on my polearm account, or I could win on both if they do Raiden and Navia running together. But I doubt that's going to happen. So, anyways, that's I think all I got. Let me look through the comments in case anyone else has anything. Pyro app already answered 240% ER. No, you wouldn't need 240% ER. You vastly, like, Shino just gets a lot of skills. Like, I really like 4-piece Thundering Fury. It makes Cyno super fun to play. I find Cyno super fun to play. I find him pretty boring to play with just his normal, like, press E during the I minigame. But the management game of having to try to get additional E's in with Thundering Fury is super fun. And Thundering Fury gives additional overload damage and will reduce his cooldown, obviously, when he triggers overload. So Thundering Fury Cyno still works very well and will probably be the best option for him with Chevreuse, right? So, and his ER needs shouldn't be very high, especially assuming you have, like, C1 Chevreuse, right? That's gonna give him energy reduction as well. It should give him 12 flat energy reduction on top of all the particles he's gonna generate. Like, I honestly think Chevreuse plus Cyno, without even factoring any other, like, potential, like, Electro Resonance or whatever, will probably make Cyno's ER needs basically nothing. With Gilded Dreams, it'll probably be still something, I imagine, but still probably not that high, right? So, anyways. Didn't everyone just build Charlotte instead of Mika? Well, yeah, exactly. I think Mika honestly has, like, some more relevance than Charlotte in many ways. but many people might be in the situation where I am, where, you know, obviously you got Charlotte on Farina's banner and you don't have Mika, because I never wished for Mika, right? So, like, yeah, that's what it is, right? That's all it is. Anyways, I think that's it. That's basically all I got for the stream, unless anyone has anything else. This was 2 hours, good lord. This was 2 hours of me talking about Navia and Chevreuse. I think I mentioned pretty much everything that I wanted to mention at this point. And I didn't even go, like, this is, like, why I don't do calcs or anything on stream, because I can just talk about characters. This is, like, stuff I talked about on my Discord server already. I don't know. Again, disclaimer that, like, these things could change. Any numbers? I'm sorry, cat. No, I'm not sorry. I'm just kidding. So, yeah, numbers could change, but numbers changing is the most likely thing that could happen, and no, I don't see what they could do to screw Chevreuse's kit, other than, like, swapping her C6 and her passive. That would make her much worse, in my opinion, at C0. More relevant in some ways. Like, it actually wouldn't be a horrible trade, but I wouldn't like it. I prefer her with her current implementation. I think she's fairly balanced. I don't think she's going to be insanely relevant. Navia's kind of the same situation. Like, Navia is by no means, like, as much as I like Navia's design, I think I like her because she's a GL that's relatively versatile and relevant for a number of teams. Why are you still here? Go away. And, yeah, I don't know. I like both the 4.3 characters. And there's a lot of quality of life in 4.3, so 4.3 seems like a relatively boring batch as far as, like, total content added. But they're doing things with characters that I like to see. I'm not completely happy with Navia in that, like, I think what Crystallize needed was not just a character that gets a slight damage buff by doing Crystallize. And I also really think... I think it's a super dick move, by the way, to make Navia not be defense scaling when the previous Geo units they released 2 years ago were defense scaling. Because the number one thing to fix the artifact system and RNG of the artifact system hurting is by making more stats relevant, right? And releasing more characters that care about more than just, like, crit stats and care about more than just attack. And there is still a very big lack of characters that care about defense. And yeah, there we go. There's this artifact. Like, we need more characters that care about this kind of artifact. Is what we need. And not the like 2-piece HP, to be clear. I'm not asking for a defense scaling, HP scaling, split scaling, dual scaling character. I'm just asking for them to be somewhat consistent, and, like, Navia should have been defense scaling, in my opinion. That would have made her much more interesting to me. And I don't know. I maintain that the only reason they did it was because how else would they have designed a signature artifact set to try to trick people into farming for it and wasting their resin for, instead of using their resin for smarter, more efficient things? If Navia was defense scaling, like, how did they beat this artifact set, right? 30% defense plus another 32% defense and 32% geo damage bonus. There's no way they would beat Husk for it without just, like, making something that just replaces Husk, basically, based on how this is triggered. So it's just like, yeah, that's why they make it attack scaling. It's because they were like, screw you, you don't get to use Husk. And that's just such a dick move, in my opinion, because we really needed more defense scaling units so that more defense artifacts are more relevant, so that you have more artifacts that are more relevant for more characters, which lessens the pain of getting, you know, artifacts like defense percent double crit on, you know, Golden Troop or whatever, right? So, 36 star Abyss and Poems only. The last 2 days, I tried, again, this is why I didn't have an edited video. The last 2 days, I have spent 8 hours in the Abyss. And, on Polearms only, and, I cleared Chamber 1. Chamber 1 wasn't that hard after I went to it. But, oh my god, Chamber 3. I'm not gonna say what the issues were. The issues were actually not the lectors. Like, I've gotten the chamber with the lectors. It's still annoyingly variable because of, like, Kairagi movement behavior and very, very minor things that, like, are very hard to control in very precise ways. Change the outcome of how well the first chamber goes. But the second chamber is the one that's actually the nightmare, because of how hard Coppelius hits, to keep it simple. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. I mentioned it briefly. It's related to Zhongli and his stupid freaking pillar getting destroyed. But, like, I got 2 or 3 6-minute and, like, 58-second or 6-minute 59-second clears. I very much know it's possible, particularly because I think both of my 6-minute 58, 6-minute 59-second clears on polearms only in Chamber 3 were when I had a worse clear on the first side, like when I only had like 50 seconds on the second side versus having a minute remaining. And so I know I can 3-star. It's just like, oh god, the amount of retries I have to do to like get a decent option. Like I would not be, it would not have taken me this long, and I would have this video out today if you could just restart individual chambers in the Abyss. Like, as far as quality of life change is going, like, Hoyo, for the love of everything, just let me restart individual chambers on Abyss. It's so awful having to do them sequentially. So, you're going to still run Navia on Martial Say. Oh, I didn't even talk about Martial Say. I didn't actually do artifact healths for Martial Say, but if you're running Navia with Farina, which is not, like, irrelevant, right? Obviously, she can provide crystallized value, yeah, and you're doing on-field Navia, you might want to make sure you like don't use her skill. Like, you'll go on-field Navia, you want to make sure you have a little bit of HP drained so that you can get the passive up on Martial Say Hunters. But yes, if you're running Navia with Farina, Martial Say Hunter is probably your best set if you're doing on-field Navia. But again, Navia is still quick swappy, so it's only in specifically like the on-field focused Navia playstyle. Martial Say Hunters will probably be her best set with Farina specifically. That also makes, isn't there the craftable Claymore that does something based on HP changing? What is the passive for that? Let me check that. What is the optimal team for Navia? Depends what you mean by optimal. I'd say, I'm guessing Ghosty, you just jumped in the stream recently. Check back in the rest of the video. You can go back right now. YouTube is nice like that. Title Shadow. After the Wheeler's healed. Oh, okay. I mean, if you're using Farina, you'll probably be healed. Attack will be increased by 24% for 8 seconds. And it has attack percent on secondary stat. So, if you don't need the ER, this could theoretically be better than the event weapon with Farina specifically, I guess. But I'm not going to necessarily recommend, particularly with refines. Like, with refine, if this was like R5, right? If you had R5 of this Claymore on Navia, I think this, what is it? Base attack, I'd have to double check what this attack percent is, but it's going to provide more attacks than the free event weapon is. But the free event weapon has ER as a substat, and Navia is probably going to want a little bit of ER in most teams, so that's why I would probably recommend the free event weapon over this weapon. But this weapon can provide more of an attack stat to Navia. So theoretically, with Farina, this Claymore could be a good option for Navia. But I'm not just going to recommend it over the event Claymore, particularly because it's probably going to require refines to be better than the event weapon. So, basically. It'd be fine. Serpent Spine will be good for her too, to be clear. But yeah, optimal team depends on what you want to do. If you're hellbent on trying to get the most damage possible out of Navia, like playing hypercarry Navia, then probably Zhongli. Again, like Zhongli is just like for the resistance shred is the only reason you include. But I think the team damage actually might be higher with Albedo, because I don't think the defensive utility of Zhongli will be as relevant, because the defensive utility of Crystallize, when you're having constant Crystallize generation, will be more relevant. But anyway, not more relevant than Zhongli Shield necessarily, but it'll be relevant enough that you don't need the shielding value that Zhongli provides, and therefore the only value of Zhongli is just like his resistance shred, and that, in my opinion, is not enough to justify using with Navia versus Albedo, who could be better at generating more crystallizes and better at doing off-field damage than Zhongli would. So, anyways, yeah, Navia's best team for like Hyper Navia, for the most damage you'll see from Navia, is probably going to be Bennett, Chungling, Navia, Zhongli, or Albedo. Because GR Resonance, Pyro Resonance is good, and additional crystallizes to make sure you always get consistent stacks relatively easily without having to think about it much, and that's kind of it. And you'll see a big damage number from Navia, but big damage number from Navia does not mean the best team, because team damage matters for, more characters than just your on-field damage dealer, right? And in that team, it would be Xiangling and Navia are the ones doing all the damage. But it might be better to have other combinations of teams using different characters that do damage in conjunction with Navia's damage. So you might sacrifice some damage you get from Navia in favor of different teammates that can contribute more damage to the teams themselves. Like, for example, realistically, being that Hyperbloom can have a flex slot, one of Navia's best teams is going to be using Navia as a flex slot in Hyperbloom teams. Like, I'm sorry. Hyperbloom is good. If you do, you know, I was going to say Farina, but Farina would probably want a healer. I don't know. Let's just say you do Farina, Bryden, and Baiju, I guess, as your Dendro instead of Nahida, even though Nahida would be better. Your Dendro application is going to be so potato. Actually, you know what? Let's just say a traditional Hyperbloom. Xingqiu or Yelan plus Raiden or Kuki plus Nahida and then Navi in the flex slot is going to probably be one of her best teams too. But if you want to see the most damage from her, right? I don't know, she's versatile. That's the whole point I was trying to make with Navia. She's versatile. So it's about, you got to ask yourself the question, what do you want to do with Navia other than what Navia does? That's it. And then you go from there to figure out how well she can work. She has versatility for quick swap. She has versatility to be more on-field playstyle wise. And I don't know. I really like how they designed her. Navia could use Petra, yes. Yeah, Hyperbloom Navia works because Hyperbloom teams almost always have a flex slot. So the only question mark with Hyperbloom Navia would be Navia would steal some application that might be relevant for creating more bloom cores, right? So for example, you might be doing a Hydro Crystallize instead of using that Hydro for an additional bloom. But particularly if you're doing something interesting, like genuinely, I think Baiju, like lessening your Hyperbloom damage by doing but increasing like Navia damage. So doing something like Farina. Oh, I'm lagging. Doing something like Farina, Baiju, and then Raiden probably would be the best. And then having Navia for a Hyperbloom team would be, you know, Farina would buff Navia's damage, right? And then your Dendro application would be so high that you'd probably have some combination of residual Electro and Hydro. And because your Dendro application is low, that's what's limiting your core generation, not your Hydro or Electro. So therefore, stealing some Hydro and Electro aura for Navia is not bad. But so Nahida might actually be not the ideal teammate there because Nahida might eat all the Hydro and Electro aura, and or Navia might eat the aura instead, which would lessen your Hyperbloom damage. So you know, might not be a bad option still, but if you want to like make a balance of Navia damage plus getting some Hyperbloom damage, Baiju, Farina, Raiden, Navia might be a much better combo than like as far as how it feels to play, and the numbers you see from all your characters might be a better combo that feels better to play, more satisfying to play, whatever, than Nahida, Xingqiu, or Yelan, and you know Raiden plus Navia, right? So I don't know. She's versatile. I like her for that, and I might get her. Honestly, I might go for her regardless, because like I kind of at the point on with my YouTube channel that I might just like be pulling for new characters if I can think of anything at all that I can make content for them for. Like my content at this point, like I don't want to just make like here's how to build Navia guide videos. Like no offense to like guide creators, to be clear, I think it's relevant content for many players of the game, but I prefer to try to make my content lately to be like, here's how to use these characters in cool ways. And particularly if I see guide creators being like, Navia should be played with Bennett, Xiangling, Zhongli, I think I have an opportunity to make content for Navia based on, you know, playing her not that way. And I think I might get Navia for that reason. And like, if I have to spend money to get Navia at all, it's just kind of like a business decision for me at that point. Rather than like, I'm just gonna wail because I want things, right? Like, I really don't have that much temptation to spend money at all, and I'm not like so interested in Navia that like, yes, I'm just gonna get Navia even if I had to. Like, if I was so interested in Navia that I was gonna get her regardless, I wouldn't have gone for C2 Farina, right? So yeah, you think she'll be a unit worth pulling? I really like her, but she seems bad I won't pull. I think she's, if you like her, I think you'll get value out of her. It is my current verdict. Again, she could change. I could be wrong, and then she might interfere with the reactions much more than I expect, and that might restrict the teams she works optimally in much more than I expect. I could be wrong. I make no claims. I made a disclaimer that I made mistakes at the very beginning of this video. I made mistakes. I could be wrong. I think people are underestimating her defensive utility. I think that people are really underestimating her versatility right now. is what I think about Navia. So I at a baseline, she's far more flexible. Like if you're someone like, I like Ito, but I'm worried about like going for Ito because I don't have Zhongli, and I don't know if I'll get C6 Goro when going for Ito because 4-stars suck to acquire. Well, then I probably wouldn't recommend Ito, because like, what is Ito relevant for outside of Mono Geo currently? Unless we get a a good Geo healer, where Farina starts to be relevant with Ito. Like Ito has like basically nothing other than Mono Geo, and that sucks. That really sucks. For someone that like want to use Ito, like I think characters are best, and like I think the best way to appreciate your favorite characters is like using characters in different ways. Like I love using Yai in different ways. I love like Farina with Yai because Yai and Farina together made like Yai Quick Bloom teams that I actually enjoy playing now. Before I didn't really like Yai Quick Bloom that much. And like I really like Yai, and I really like using Yai in different ways. And I can do that with her because she's an off-field unit, right? And Navia is not an off-field unit mostly. She does off-field damage in her burst, but she has that versatility, and she has quick swap versatility. And like I could definitely use Yai with Navia together. And I could foresee using Navia with other units that are on-field, as long as that on-fielder is not super greedy for field time, right? The fact that I can like lay the groundwork to figure out, yeah, I think I might be able to use Navia and Duvilet together, I think is a big selling point to Navia. And like the fact that the character can remain potentially relevant for you to choose as a flex slot for a character is a very big selling point to me. And I think it means that you are more likely to get long-term value out of a unit like Navia than you are from like someone like Risley, right? I'm an Ito main and the struggle is real. Yeah. I think Navia is going to be a support like Albedo. No, Navia is not going to be a support. Lucky Phoenix, I'm assuming you just joined in and watched the whole stream. I went over Navia's whole kit. This was meant to be my stream of like my thoughts on Navia, and like if something about their kit meaningfully changes, I'll put a comment or whatever below. I'll pin a comment and be like, hey, this stuff has changed. If it changes really meaningfully to the point where my conclusions change about either Chevreuse or Navia, I'll just like unlist the stream, to be clear. But assuming no major changes happen to these characters, or I don't get things egregiously wrong, this stream will stay up and whatnot. So, yeah. Why is Hyperbloom plus somebody their best team? Because Hyperbloom is strong. That's why. And an optimal Hyperbloom team can contribute a lot of damage on its own, and then your flex slot is just additional damage on top of that, right? And it's very hard for many teams to compete with Hyperbloom's damage on a baseline in single target damage, right? Like a C1 Hu Tao with Homa, I think starts to compete with Hyperbloom's single target damage. So yeah, I don't know. I like Hyperbloom for the fact that it provides a baseline framework, right? And I think Hyperbloom is a lot more interesting now with Farina, especially. Because now Hyperbloom combos like with Farina Baiju, aka Hyperbloom combos without Nahida, are more relevant, much more relevant than they used to be before. Like this is fundamentally a Hyperbloom team in some ways, but most people would not call it a Hyperbloom team because it's not very consistently triggering the Hyperbloom. But instead it's a Quick Bloom team, right? Where you're getting a little bit of additional Hyperblooms, but mostly it's just, quick and aggravate damage from Yai, plus, the damage from Farina, right? So, I'll show this team, why not, real quick. I really like this team. I've been messing with it a bit. So this team is, this team and then one other Kirara team variation with Farina is what I might make a video on this team either next week or the week after. It'd be a fairly easy video for me to make, so. Yeah, she's like a sub DPS, can be on field. Yeah, she's flexible. So I really like Navia, but just put you there. I'm not actually gonna go through the whole abyss or anything, to be clear. I really like Farina for like providing a damage buffer. Like usually if you're using Farina team, I find that like oftentimes it means like not using an Animo, right? Like wherein I might normally use an Animo with Yai to buff Yai's damage. Now I'm using Farina instead, and I'm buffing team damage by nature with Yai by nature of getting Hyperbloom damage and by nature of Farina's own damage contribution and Farina's damage buff. like Yai's damage itself is not necessarily that much better or is worse than with an Anemo, but it's a new team option for her, and that was not really nearly as relevant before, in my opinion. That's like what I really like about it's one of the things I really like about Frina, is the fact that she does that, is the fact that she provides a relevant option. That means it's not as bad to like not have Anemo as it was before, kind of thing. More versatility is good. On this team, what characters replace Yai? I mean, realistically, Fischl is probably better. Like in single target, well, honestly, even in AoE, Fischl might still be better. But Fischl would be better at proccing blooms, and Fischl's A4 is just freaking broken. So like, I don't know. Let's see what the first side clear is here, and then we'll check what, and I can just replace Yai with Fischl and see if it goes faster. I'm not sure. Okay. I'm gonna not do the last wave because the Hydroelectrics cringe. I don't know. We'll see how long it takes. Kind of stop being interrupted like that. I meant to do not that, but it's fine. I should probably do this. Oh, I should have waited to do that. Stop. Okay, I think I play this a little bit poorly, but it's fine. Where are you, bro? Oh, I just wasted that burst. Okay, good job, me. Wow, I'm just playing this really well. Oh, let's do this actually. I was really hoping it would target the Lecter, but oh well, it still hit them. Okay, yeah, and I hate this phase of this chamber. It's really not fun, in my opinion. And also, this team is pretty single target. I should actually probably do the second side, honestly, with it. That's probably going to be a better test, honestly. There's too much variability in like EI's targeting in that chamber. Not that I couldn't clear the Abyss with, like, I could put a decent single target team. Like, it wasn't so slow that I couldn't clear it with this team in that chamber. But I'm going to use a different team for the first chamber here, and then we're going to do the EI team on the second side. And then I can compare it with Fischl, and that'll be a better comparison because it's a more single target team anyways. What am I doing? Having a stroke. Baju, you, Yai, and this. And this is a DPS Kirara, by the way. That's part of the point of the team, is so I can like see big damage number from Kirara. I don't have her there for the shielding. I just like her there because it's fun to catbox kill things. We're just gonna no brain it. We're just gonna we'll do fragile. We'll do fragile Nilou. Oh, by the way, I should give Nilou her key back because I've discovered I basically prefer keeping Farina on what's it called? I'm stuck on the thing. I'm having a stroke. The Fab sword. You know, I can brain. Wow. Ow, don't kill me. Ow. Blam. Oh, this is the most Nilou Abyss that has ever Nilou'd. Jesus Christ. 1 minute clear in that chamber is very fast, in my opinion. Alright, so 8 minutes 56 was the start here. We got animations. Why did I do Baiju first? I couldn't tell you. It doesn't matter. Whatever. Oh, I didn't have cooking up already. Whatever. Where are you? There we go. Nice, 26k. Well, I meant to do this. That.
Taking a turn for the better.
I lost some uptime on Yai's skill there. I haven't played this team that much, I'm not used to it a little bit. I feel like I could have had him dead there, that's for sure. And kill him with Kira, bam! Let's go. What was the timer there? Alright, you guys tell me. I think it was about a minute. I'm pretty sure we were about, like, 8 minutes or so. So, that was about a minute clear. Let's try with official. This is basically a preview for my... for a key router video in a week or so. And that's the end of the stream. Because I've been streaming long enough. I thought this stream was going to be like an hour. But, turns out I talked for way longer than I expected. We'll use Nilo again, because it's no-braining. And it do damage. Whoop, not Guy. Official. I'm pretty sure Official's going to be better here. Realistically. Yayo could potentially work too, but it just means you're not spending much time in cat box form. Yayo might be better in some ways. Just means you're not spending much time in cat box mode on what's your bucket? Kirara. Oh, I just used her C6. I meant to switch to Nahida. I didn't mean to use Raiden C6. Okay, good. I mean to use what's her bucket C6. Don't get me. Okay, that was about the same time. Same time clear for that. Okay. Okay, probably start with that. And I don't know why I did that before bursts. It's fine. This. I don't know why I did that. Just playing this badly. Oh, by the way, Official is not on 4-piece Golden Troop, and probably should be. And also, Official should probably be using an EM timepiece in this team as well. So, This actually feels worse to me. That's interesting. To be clear, I haven't played this variation at all. Where are you? Oh my god. Did you just move? Where is he? Okay, well, I have scuffed this, I think, is my answer here. Does that even seek out? Does it? Oh, it does seek out. Okay. He's over here. Oh my god. Jesus Christ. Okay, that was horrible. That was horrible. I don't think it was actually that much worse. I just played that horribly. Official's weird, right? You gotta use Official smartly. In most teams, yeah, Official, and as far as like keeping up Official, and I did not keep up Official properly. That's what that comes down to. You. I already did that. I need to do Yelon. Yelon's dead. Okay, it's fine. That's fine. Okay, can I, like, generate any blooms? Okay, like, Yelon dying is really not ideal. Turns out. Oh my god, I tried to swap to Yelon, didn't have Yelon. Oh my god, these enemies hit me 500 times and I couldn't stop getting interrupted. I love these attacks. It's cool. It's cool. I don't think Breach of Primuses are very well designed enemies, in my opinion. I think the Electors are actually pretty well designed, as much as, like, I think a lot of people might be hating on them right now and not happy with them. I actually think they are well designed, but Electors, or sorry, Breach of Primuses, less so. Oh, helps if I do this. Blam, blam, don't kill me! Hey, you're still alive, which is annoying. Oh my god. Oh my god, are you serious? Thank you. Okay. Let Nahida die. My excuse is that triple hydro, triple hydro Nilu is the weakest it can be, and notably that as a Nilu without Key of Kasha's suit is with C2 Nahida, so probably... No, Key of Kasha's suit is a bigger upgrade, I think, than C2 Nahida is, but anyways. It's not the strongest it could be, but good lord. Cryo Heralds are the real pain. Oh yeah, Cryo Heralds are kind of cringe, I agree. Let's try this again. I don't know why I did that. Didn't really need to aim the attack there. Where is he? There he is. How? Okay, it is like substantially more annoying to get this dude to trigger out invisibility in this team. I think that's honestly the main thing that's happening here. It's not like that I think he should... This team is worse on damage, it's just that I can't trigger the invisibility. Also, I don't like the... Well, no, it's... not being able to forcibly use normal attacks is a little bit of a bummer. There we go, okay. I don't know, it definitely feels worse. I thought it'd feel better. I might just need to figure out how to play it. It's not that much worse, to be clear. That was, like, slightly worse. The most notable thing was, like, the time loss based on the, ow. Just smacked my finger on my keyboard. So, notably, like, my Yai build is better than my official build. Official, particularly with Golden Troop now, could be substantially better with Golden Troop. It's a good official build, to be clear. It's a very good official build, but, like... It could be better with Golden Troop. I think on Akasha, if you want to like compare it to your official or something, this is like a top 8% according to Akasha for an aggravate official. And in that team, because official is triggering a meaningful amount of blooms, official should be on something like this instead. An EM timepiece would be ideal. Because she had 44 EM, which means, you know, the hyper bloom damage compared to like my Yai's damage from 200 EM there was much less. And so I don't know. It's interesting. I think I could get that team to end up performing better if I got used to it more than my Yai team, whether it be by changing the build slightly or by being against an enemy that doesn't have an annoying mechanic where the reason the Yai got it not invisible right away is because Yai just auto targets when it's invisible from fairly decent range, whereas Fischl will only like you hit it within a shorter range, and it has to be I don't know if it has to be visible or not, but yeah, I don't know. I was struggling to get it not being visible, so that was more like mechanical issues combined with, I think, the fact that my official build is slightly not ideal for it. I think the teams are functionally very similar with Yai versus Fischl. I like Yai more, I think, but I'm also much more used to using Yai, so, you know. Anyways, sorry for spending the last 30 minutes doing not Navia Chevreuse things. This is what I always do. I get distracted, sorry. If you just joined in, this is the end of the stream. Watch back at the beginning of the video. The first like 2.5 hours is just me talking about like Navia and Chevreuse. And then someone asked a question about my DPS Kirara team here, and so I decided to go test things. So. Oh yeah, Fischl has a charge shot. I forgot Fischl's a bow character. Whoops. That would have helped that. Why do you need... Kirara is not on a shield build. This is my Kirara build. Yeah, this is DPS Kirara. Like, the big part of the point of this team is to get, like, decent spread damage with Kirara. And, like, DPSing 4 stars, like, you get more value out of someone like Frida's damage percent bonus on 4 stars that are not meant to do that much damage. But by nature of being a Dendro character and applying some Dendro, like, you see, like, when I was, I don't think I saw it in the stream, but you see, like, I've seen, like, you know, 20 to 30k from the initial activation of her skill and, like, around 30k plus on her second hit here in this exact team variation. And then Yai obviously gets her own meaningful damage, Farina gets meaningful damage, and then Baij is here to, you know, keep up the team and bust all the damage a little bit too. So yeah, I don't know, it's definitely a good team. It's just a bit single target focus, I'd say, although it can be competent in AoE. Like, I absolutely could have used this in the first chamber too. It's just a little bit more annoying to deal with lectors with this specific team, I'd say. But yeah, it's DPS hero. No, I don't have C4, sadly, and no, I don't plan to get C4 because I don't have any particular wand for Ayato or Sino, so unfortunately probably no C4 Kiara for me anytime soon. I wish I'd be able to see not insignificantly more damage from being able to have, because I don't think there's any ICD. This only hits every 3 seconds on her C4, but 200% of her attack is not insignificant. It also, I don't think it works when you're in like cat box mode, so you have to be doing normal charge attacks with other characters. Well, it can be with Kirara herself, but Kirara is, in the way I play her, is not normally doing normal charge attacks, so honestly, yeah, C4 is not that relevant for me. Because I'd have to go out of my way to, like, use normal attacks on Yai, probably, most of the time, to be able to get this to trigger. Which is not irrelevant, but it's annoying to have to think about, honestly, when the way I'm playing it is I just want a cat box. So, yeah, not going for C4 Kirara. But anyways, thanks for watching. I think that's all I got. Join my Discord server if you have more questions or whatever about Navia, Chevreuse, and if anything changes with them, I'll talk about it there, and I might put a pinned comment or whatever below. So hopefully you enjoyed. I like Navia and Chevreuse. I'm looking forward to the release.